we ensure our partner air forces have the combat air capability they need.
Focusing on tomorrow isn't enough. That's why we innovate for what comes after next.
With us, the UK is equipped with sovereign combat air power wherever and whenever it needs it.
We don't stop at technologies. We're making a positive impact on our wider society, developing skills, strengthening supply chains, and striving for net zero.
We're building strategic relationships on a local, national and global scale.
Our people are everything. We're creating a culture that values diversity and celebrates innovation.
Together, we are unleashing the power of combat air.
Today's battle space is the most contested since the Cold War. Regional adversaries are not bound by regional constraints. Our challenges are physical and cyber, with a global reach. At Lockheed Martin, we understand these threats require a 21st century security approach, where battlespace assets are edge devices, seamlessly and securely sharing information at 5G speeds to enable rapid decision-making when it matters most. Where an F-35 instantly shares critical information across air, land, sea, space, and cyber, and compare with hypersonics, directed energy, and other emerging technologies to deliver converged effects. We are the only company with platforms and integration expertise across all domains. Our unmatched first-hand knowledge can help multiply the power of our partners' assets. And that's why our 21st century vision provides our customers a decisive edge and serves as a powerful deterrent to future conflict. Lockheed Martin, partnering for security and prosperity.
We are defined by the questions we ask and the challenges we take on. When will sustainable be the standard? Will data be the difference? Can materials be lighter? Can they handle 5,000 degrees? How can travel be transformed? How will we make the world safer? Decisions faster? Are seamless communications the key? Can what's up there help us down here? Is human ingenuity limitless? Is our true potential endless? At RTX, we take on the big challenges.
See you all back here again. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we proceed with day 2 of the Chief of the Air Staff's Global Air and Space Chiefs Conference. You had a marvellous time on the terrace upstairs. Wonderful evening. Just a reminder that that terrace unfortunately is closed today, but what you can do if you're a gold ticket holder, at the break, please go up to the Maxwell Library and take coffee up there, another beautiful room. But let's proceed with today's events. Yesterday, we heard some pretty blunt assessments, some pretty sobering assessments as well of current conflicts, and also a real call to action for immediate boosting of capabilities to deal with short-term threats, whilst also keeping a really close eye on longer-term adversaries. These are complex times, and it's in this context that I'm very, very pleased to say that the new Minister for the Armed Forces for the United Kingdom is here to talk to you today. He's fresh from the state opening of the new Parliament. So please do give a warm round of applause to Luke Pollard, the Minister for the Armed Forces.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Susanna. Good morning, all. When I say I'm delighted to speak to you today, it's not just because this is my first speech as a minister. It's also because you, the people in this room, are the people who are going to be responsible for the biggest transformation of our Air Force and space capabilities that we need, not just in the UK, but across our alliances as well. Because whether you're a member of the Armed Forces, an international ally, or a partner in industry, you will know that our air, land and sea naval capabilities are all dependent on our ability to work together in space and in cyber. Satellites and cyber communications are intrinsic components of our command and control, our secure comms, our ISR and PNT capabilities, and our missile defence. Yet for far too long, the Ministry of Defence and government strategies have not given enough value to space and cyber that they should have. And neither have they given enough value to those people who work in them either. If we're to get Britain's fighting forces fit to deter our adversaries and defeat them if necessary, we must be ready for the profound step changes in warfare that we are seeing in our increasingly volatile and contested world. We need to be a truly integrated force equipped for all-domain warfare. Multi-domain integration is not enough. I see MDI as a journey that takes us to a destination. That destination is all-domain warfare, where to win, we control space, cyber, electronic spectrums, as well as air, land and sea in a single joined-up approach. And that is the change that we're determined to bring to defence, to support those people in defence who are already working on that. And I'll come back to the concept of all-domain warfare in a moment, and the role that we all have to play in realising it. But I'm first going to focus on the existing work of our air, space and cyber forces, and how the new Labour government's plan for defence can strengthen that work. If we ever needed reminding about the outstanding work that our servicemen and women of our air, space and cyber forces do, then 2024 gives us plenty of examples. From protecting UK and NATO airspace 24/7, 365 or 366, as it will be in this leap year, to operating seamlessly with allies to conduct precision strikes against Houthi sites in Yemen, intercepting Iranian missiles and drones launched against Israel, from training Ukrainian F-16 pilots and lighting up the sky for the anniversary of D-Day, to thwarting countless cyber attacks, getting crucial humanitarian aid into Gaza, and conducting major exercises with NATO and our other allies around the world, showing that NATO is joined up, capable and ready. They've also kept our comms systems and intelligence secure and strengthened our alliances that help protect our national interests right round the globe. It amounts to an impressive legacy for just 7 months' work. And I want to thank everyone who has served for their professionalism and for everything they and you do to protect not just our country, but our allies as well. But the United Kingdom does not fight alone. We're proud of the NATO alliance, proud to be the founding member, and my party is proud of the role we played in forging that alliance all those years ago. Proud that it continues to grow with our new alliance partners in Sweden and Finland, and proud to work seamlessly with so many allies around the world, many of whom are represented here today. Now, I'm a son of a Royal Navy submariner and a very proud Navy brat. And as the MP for my hometown in Plymouth, which is home to Devonport, the largest naval base in Western Europe, my experience of talking to Armed Forces personnel has gone from being a small child smuggled onto a submarine to have a look around, to attending Armed Forces Days up on Plymouth Hoe, if you've seen them. And I know that when you speak to our Armed Forces personnel about their achievements, they're more likely to say it's just part of the day job. But as I've seen since being a kid, being a member of our armed forces is more than a day job. It takes you away from your home and your loved ones and demands everything from you. It is the ultimate public service. And that's why, as the Minister for the Armed Forces, I'll endeavour to always have your back. But I have to level with you first. That does not mean we'll be able to do everything we want to as quickly as we'd like. Over recent years, the new Defence Secretary, John Healey, and myself have raised concerns about the real-term government cuts and its inability to fund existing plans. I've raised concerns about force size and capabilities, about readiness and resilience, about the state of defence facilities and the appalling state of military housing that we ask our personnel and their families to live in, about the state of retention and recruitment. And regardless of how much I would like to be able to address those challenges overnight, we know it will take time. But the work of change has begun across government, and that includes in the Ministry of Defence. The Prime Minister has laid out an ambitious yet deliverable plan towards rebuilding our armed forces, built on public service and collaboration, and a clear understanding that defence is the first duty of any government. And that started with the Strategic Defence Review that he announced on Tuesday. That review will be overseen by the Defence Secretary and led by former NATO Secretary General Lord Robertson. You don't need me to tell you that this is going to be a critical review for the Royal Air Force, for the UK Space Command, for our partnerships with industry, and for the evolution of our airspace and cyber capabilities. Over the last year, drones and missiles fired by Houthis have terrorised international shipping. Putin has used them to terrorise our friends in Ukraine, and Iran has used them to attack Israel. They've pushed what we need, the envelopes of how we consider modern warfare. And that means we have to look again at how we fight, how we strengthen air and missile defence, look at our countermeasures and get that right up the agenda. As drones and technology reshape the battlefield and satellites become increasingly central to warfare, if only in the public understanding of their role, the risk of cyber attacks continue, the risks of undermining our institutions, our critical national infrastructure, our democracy continues. The breadth of the threats we face and the need to innovate at an ever-increasing pace demand a fresh assessment of the state of our armed forces, the capabilities we need, and the resources that we have available. So you'll be hearing more from me and other ministers about a one defence approach, with a truly integrated services and capabilities that we can prosecute all domain warfare. It is integral to our ability to deter and integral to our ability to fight and win if we need to. Our Strategic Defence Review will be an open and collaborative defence review. And for those of you that have heard me speak before, you know that I always give out homework, and the homework I'm going to give out to you is this. Please contribute. Whether you're from the forces, industry or academia or one of our allies, please add your insights and expertise to that process. So we don't just bolster the front line, we do everything that underpins it as well, from our skills base to our industrial resilience, and of course to our alliances. That collaborative approach will mean that the Strategic Defence Review will report in the first half of 2025. However, the work to strengthen our deterrence began on day one of getting elected. You go for the international visitors, you go straight from a sports centre where you get announced as an MP at 4 a.m. in the morning, slightly bleary-eyed, into a department. It's quite a whirlwind time, but the work of change needs to start straight away. That's why we're committed to increasing defence spending to 2.5% of GDP as soon as we can. We've committed to our nuclear triple lock. That's continuing the continuous at-sea nuclear deterrent, with our 4 new next-generation ballistic missile-carrying submarines being built in Barrow, and a commitment to all the future upgrades that are required to keep Britain and our NATO allies safe with those submarines. And although there's been a change in Downing Street, let me reassure you as well that there will be no change in Britain's steadfast support for our friends in Ukraine. Within 48 hours of being appointed, the Defence Secretary was in Odessa to pledge a new shipment of missiles and munitions to support Ukraine's fight. And he committed to President Zelensky to get crucial UK kit into Ukrainian hands within 100 days. At the NATO summit in Washington, The Prime Minister told President Zelensky that he would stick with Ukraine and provide £3 billion in military aid each year for as long as it takes for Ukraine to win. Putin's illegal war has underlined the belief of our government has in a NATO-first defence policy, and it's shown a light on the shortcomings of our and many of our allies' stockpiles as well. So we'll provide leadership by boosting Britain's industrial capacity and resilience of our supply chains, by aligning our defence industrial strategy more closely with our security priorities, as well as our economic priorities, which will provide a boost for British jobs, industry, and our regions. And we've also committed to look hard at procurement, to cut out waste, improve value for money, and bring greater urgency to our acquisition programmes. And we've instigated important organisational reforms to improve military leadership and planning, with a new military strategic headquarters and a new national armaments director. Whilst these domestic commitments and reforms are fundamental to strengthening our deterrence and our capabilities, our global alliances and partnerships are equally important to the security of our nation. And our commitment to NATO is unshakable. We must and we will fulfil our obligations as a NATO member and strengthen Britain's leadership within the alliance. We'll also seek to strengthen European security by negotiating a new security pact with the EU, seeking a new bilateral defence agreement with Germany, refreshing the Lancaster House Agreement with France, and stronger defence partnerships with our joint expeditionary force partners. Further afield, to protect our values and global interests and drive innovation, we're committing to developing and strengthening the AUKUS partnership to realise its full economic and security potential, and committed to building closer partnerships with the Indo-Pacific and our allies in Africa. The final and perhaps most important piece to have effective defence is our people. And again, I must level with you that we're currently not recruiting or retaining enough people in our armed forces. This is a challenge not unique to Britain. Many of our allies are facing this as well. But if we're to transform our armed forces, we need to attract more people, we need to train more people, and we need to retain more people. That means offering a career that makes them want to stay for longer, and for those who have left, want to rejoin. The moral component of fighting power remains the key to building an effective and lethal force, which is why over recent years, John Healey, the Defence Secretary, and I have fought to highlight the need to improve conditions for serving personnel, their families, and veterans. And that's why, as a government, we're determined to renew the contract between the nation and those who serve. You'll hear more about that in the months ahead. It's a commitment we made in our manifesto, and it's absolutely vital for our national security. If we don't get this right, we don't get the people that keeps our country and our allies safe. So we'll put the Armed Forces Covenant fully into law and appoint an independent Armed Forces Commissioner with a clear brief to improve service life. And as our new Minister for Defence Procurement and Industry, my colleague Maria Eagle, has said, we'll fix our broken procurement system, and she also has a determination to tackle the poor quality of the military housing that so many of our personnel and their families live in. And our new Minister for Veterans and People, who was until a few months ago a Colonel in the Royal Marines, Alistair Cairns, will improve veterans' access to support with mental health, employment and housing, a focus more on delivery for veterans. We'll be a joined-up One Defence ministerial team breaking down silos and working to deliver a joined-up One Defence approach to the sector, with serving personnel, officials, innovators and industry all working more closely. Now, the window for my office looks out over the Thames. This is a big improvement on my window for my office in Parliament, because as a relatively new MP when I was elected in 2017, if you got a window in your office, you were doing well. So to have multiple windows is something quite of a treat. And from those windows in the MOD, I can see the RAF memorial on the banks of the River Thames. Now that memorial to British and Allied pilots who fought in the Battle of Britain, that Churchill christened the few who gave so much for the many, is something that I take very seriously. It's a reminder of the important role that the Royal Air Force plays, not just in our national security, but in our national story as well. And as I take on the role of Minister for the Armed Forces, those memorials, not just on the Thames, but in every community around the country, including the one that I represent in Plymouth, are a lasting reminder not only that we must have a strong Air Force, but we must back the people who work in uniform and the civilians who support our Air Force. But like the 1930s, our world is increasingly volatile and dangerous. And like the 1930s, we need to invest in air power and give our Royal Air Force not only the best aircraft, but the best capabilities and people that we can. But just like the 1930s, when new technology like radar was being pioneered by the RAF, today some of the same spirit of innovation exists and must be nurtured further in space, cyber, and across electronic warfare, giving us, I hope, a much clearer plan for averting war in Western Europe than existed in the 1930s. Our security relies on effective collective deterrence, and this new Labour government will enhance it by increasing defence spending, investing in our armed forces, investing in our next generation nuclear capability, and reconnecting Britain with our allies and partners. We will reform defence to improve decision making, strengthen industrial resilience, improve morale, and deliver better value for money. And in partnership with our innovators and industry, we'll equip ourselves for all domain warfare, cutting edge capabilities and greater lethality. More integrated and interoperable with our allies, standing with Ukraine, standing up to Putin, and standing up for the values that we all share: democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. So whether you are on the front line or in support, an international ally or a partner in industry, you all have an important part to play. And to our international friends, I want you to know that Britain is back. In Britain, with Keir Starmer as Prime Minister and John Healey as Defence Secretary, you will have a refreshed and revitalised partner in the world stage, reconnecting with friends and building new alliances in service of collective deterrence and security. We have our eyes wide open about how difficult these challenges are, how hard the world is, and nothing I've outlined today will be quick or easy. There are difficult challenges ahead, hybrid threats, hostile states, but we must bring a more pragmatic leadership, a clearer plan, and a new spirit of collaboration that will make us secure at home and strong abroad. Thank you.
Minister, many thanks. Do take a seat. So I'm delighted that you're able to give your first speech as Minister here at the Global Air and Space Chiefs Conference. So thank you very much. We will have a short Q&A. So I've already got a few questions that have come through. First of all, though, it is interesting your focus on cyber. We've also heard during this conference about the potential vulnerabilities of satellite systems as well. So do you think that the space domain is becoming as important as the air domain in some respects?
Well, I think it always has been for a certain extent, because you can't deliver effective air power without space. I think my frustration about the debate in the past few years is that we've still been two stovepipes and silos. There's still been too pretty much protectionism, not just about capabilities, but about share of voice between the different domains. That's why making a clear case for all domain warfare, you can't prosecute battles on land without space and cyber and electronic warfare capabilities, nor can you do that in the air. So I think the approach that we want to take as a new government is to make the case that, yes, air power is critical and vital to our national security. Yes, we need to invest more in it, but it doesn't exist in a domain on its own. And so we need to make sure we have greater focus on space. I said I was a Navy brat earlier. I'm also quite proud to be a space nerd in terms of these things. I really enjoyed Spacecom Expo, the industrial conference for the space industry, and I've attended for the past few years. I think what I've seen there is a growing importance of space, not just in terms of how it joins up our capabilities, how it connects more of our industrial partners, how it allows commanders on the ground to pick more data to make more informed decisions about a single digital battle space. It's actually that we can use it to grow jobs and be part of that key growth mission. So some of you will have heard the Prime Minister set out our missions for government, and growing our economy is the #1 mission, because if we don't grow our economy, there'll be no money for public services in any department. And I think space in particular has an absolutely critical role and a potential to grow much bigger, to have more people seeking to invest and grow space businesses, more people wanting to have a career in space technology, and use that to create the jobs, the well-paid jobs, the apprenticeships that we need, as well as the security we need to keep ourselves and our allies safe.
Thank you. Another question. focusing on the fact, of course, we are in this changing threat environment. So how committed to the GCAP programme is the new Labour government?
Well, the GCAP programme is a really important programme for us. It's important with our partners in Japan and Italy, and in fact the new defence sector, we're meeting both those partners next week to underline that. But it's not right for me to prejudge what might happen in the defence review. We need cutting-edge capabilities. We need to make sure that when we're procuring systems, high-end systems, the Gucci systems that we need to keep our country and our allies safe, that we do it in the most cost-effective way, and that is by working with our partners. But Lord Robertson's review is about making those decisions differently. It should not be about ministers saying, you can do a review, but by the way, I'm going to tell you in speeches about this platform, that platform, and this platform along the way. We've set out that review that's been done differently than defence reviews in the past, a small expert team looking at it, and they'll be looking at all our capabilities across the range. But the defence sector is meeting our GCAP partners next week, and that's important.
Okay, thank you. A question has come through from Sophie Antrobus. The MOD and armed forces have become increasingly risk-averse over time, from media and comms to safety regulations, to how forces train as well. How important is it to address these issues in the SDR, the Strategic Defence Review?
Well, I think risk is a really important factor. That's a good question, Sophie. Thank you. I think if we are genuinely accepting the assessment that is being provided to us, that we're living in more contested and difficult times, then you've got to have a different assessment of your risk picture. You've got to be able to look at how you procure and how you operate with a different way, because you can't jump, in my mind, from a situation of having peacetime levels of risk to a wartime level of risk with no intervening period. Because risk is about culture.
And are we in that intervening period right now?
Well, the previous Defence Secretary said so when he made a speech recently. The briefings that I've had, certainly, you get more briefings in government than you do in opposition, shall I say. And certainly, the picture is difficult. We're in increasingly more difficult and contested times. And I do think how we play into risk matters. Now, I do not want people to be unsafe. I do not want us to degrade health and safety regulations. But I do want us to look at how we deal with risk, about how do we make sure we're looking at effect and outcome, not just process. Because I think over many, many years, the Ministry of Defence, like many other departments, have built up layer upon layer of process and process. Now, many of those exist for very good reason, but many of them probably should be streamlined. Streamlining and dealing with risk in a different way, I think not only makes us more effective and delivers better value for money, it avoids some of that frustration that service personnel often feel about following a process they know doesn't deliver anything. That is just paperwork for the sake of it. So I think we do need to look at risk. That will be part of how Lord Robertson and the Defence Review look at this. But I want us all to be challenging our assumptions about the processes in which we work in, about whether that's fit for the 21st century, and importantly, looking at the lessons from Ukraine, where the risk appetite and profile is, for very obvious reasons, very different. How do we learn the lessons of how you can be innovative, faster, and more effective if you change your risk appetite and profile?
Okay, thank you. Another question from Mark Alexander, Air Tanker. Would the Minister comment on his vision for the use of public-private partnerships for delivering defence capability?
Well, having been on one of those aircraft in opposition, the service that's provided is very good. But look, we're inheriting a situation where we have contractualisation in large parts of the Ministry of Defence. Those contracts, when they provide good value, should be supported. When they provide apprenticeships, they should be supported. But we do need to look at all the contractualisation when they come up to make sure they're delivering value for money, make sure they're delivering the capabilities that we need. And I think there are some reforms that we'd like to make to contractualisation to deliver that better value. Perhaps I'll skip over Air Tanker and take the contractualisation of military housing as a good example. Those contracts are not delivering. And it's not only bad value for money for the taxpayer when those contracts don't deliver, it means we're seeing people leave our armed forces because there's black mould in their kids' bedrooms, because there's leaky roofs, because there's broken boilers. Now, that's a contract that's not working and needs to be looked at seriously, which Maria Eagle is doing so. But we will not be able to deliver the effect if we don't have our partners in industry alongside us. So when we talked about One Defence, and I mentioned it from the podium, that One Defence is not just about saying the RAF will work more closely with Stratcom or work more closely with the Army and so forth. It's about working more closely with a whole force approach with our partners in industry as well. And so I think they're a vital part of what we've got to do, and the effect that we deliver is only possible because of our contractual partners, because of the partners in industry. And I think anyone going into my job that doesn't understand that will be making poor decisions.
Okay, thank you. I've got a request from Dominic Nicol from The Telegraph. Can you please give us more details about the European Security Pact that you mentioned in your speech? What does this look like? What is your vision? What can we expect?
Yeah, I think it's obvious that the context has changed quite a lot in these contested times. There is an important requirement for us to collaborate and cooperate more closely with our allies and partners. And without risking reopening the Brexit debates, I think it is obvious that there are opportunities to work more closely to make sure that we're keeping ourselves and our allies safer by better sharing of information, by working more closely and looking at those areas where we can support one another in doing so. We already do so in many cases with our NATO partners, which by and large are majority are EU members. And so there's opportunities to do that. And I think for me, it speaks to two things. Firstly, that Britain is back on the world stage, because I've lost count of how many international conferences I've attended over the past few years where there's been a feedback from colleagues, we need you back. Please stop spending so much time looking inside the country and play your role on the international stage, which we need you to. Now, that's certainly been true on Ukraine. We provide that international leadership, but I think we need to do that more so. And part of that is making sure that our systems, our treaties, our alliances are fit for purpose. And that's why it's not just a security pact with the EU that will look at the security relationships, the things that arguably that we should have retained in the last Brexit deal, but the government at the time chose not to. And I don't know a single Leave voter in my constituency that would object to any of those changes. It's about making sure that we can work more cooperatively with our allies and partners in these difficult times.
And what form would that take? Would it be regular meetings, for example? Would you have kind of summits? I'm just kind of trying to see a vision, or is that still to be worked through?
Yeah, so that would be primarily the lead department for that will be the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, and they're already having conversations with our EU and European friends to look and explore what's possible here, just as we are with our German and French allies as well. I think if you look at the structures, I'm less fussed about the structures personally. I'm more fussed about the effect. I want to make sure that we have the ability to be more interoperable, that we have the ability to procure better and sometimes together, and making sure that we can defend our European NATO area in a more joined up way. Now, that's the effect I'm looking for. And we're already seeing, so this week we've got the European Political Community meeting, which is an opportunity outside NATO to come together as international allies to start discussing some of the issues that affect Britain's and Europe's security, as well as our economy on a wider basis. Now, there's opportunities for working together more. And I think when we view our allies as friends, rather than people we need to have friction with, I think we'll have a better effect and we'll all be safer because of it.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, certainly there was a stark warning yesterday from Professor Justin Bronk from RUSI just about the extent to which the clock is ticking when it comes to our defences, given the situation in Ukraine. And there is a question, and I'm just trying to find it again, because it's just disappeared on my iPad, but essentially about that. Are you really going to be taking, this situation as seriously as you can? The clock is ticking. You talked in your speech about you're committed to building up stockpiles, but you have a strategic defence review. That's going to take time. That will then take time to deliver. And this is all eating into pretty urgent time that actually could be used to be building up the conventional arms that are considered to be needed. How can you address these concerns?
Well, when I was first elected in 2017, one of the very wise old sage members of Parliament told me that in politics the answer is normally and rather than or. And I think that applies very critically to here. The Strategic Defence Review is not asking everyone to pause. We are not saying stop what you are doing. What we're doing is, having set up a different structure than we've had in the past, we're asking the work to continue, to reform our procurement system alongside a defence review, to reform our military housing alongside a defence review, to invest in our capabilities alongside a defence review. And yes, the defence review will set out not only the threats we're facing, but how we can reshape our armed forces to make them more lethal and more interoperable with our allies, learning the lessons that we're seeing from Ukraine. There's nothing in that defence review that should stop or slow down our support for Ukraine. In fact, actually the opposite is true. What the Defence Secretary and the Prime Minister have set out is an acceleration of our support for Ukraine, but it also a very clear objective of learning the lessons. Because if you look at how warfare is being prosecuted in Ukraine, if you look at the work that Ukrainian forces and our allies are making in supporting Ukraine, then that does pose some fundamental challenges to how we defend our European NATO area, how we make sure that we're dealing with the new threats, and perhaps importantly for procurement, about how quickly the battlefield is changing, how quickly Russia is and sometimes adapting to weapon systems, how quickly it is important that Ukraine is using spiral development to then get an advantage again on the battlefield. That's the type of lessons that we need to learn as part of this defence review. I don't want anything to stop. I want it to continue because we need to make sure we're supporting Ukraine during this period. And in fact, I think with the work that we're doing, it will go faster.
Okay, and it ties in, thank you, Minister, to another question which is popular. The war in Ukraine has taught us the necessity of integrated air defence. What is your view on the procurement of such systems for the UK?
That's a very good question. If Maria Eagle were here, she would be, who's my colleague who looks after defence procurement, she'd be talking about our broken procurement system. I think what we've seen with the attacks on Ukrainian, not only frontline forces, but critical national infrastructure and civilian targets by Russia, is we're seeing air defence have a new level of importance. And that's not just dealing with the high-end missiles, not just dealing with those really long-range fires, but it's dealing with drones, what we've seen elsewhere around the world with swarm drone technology, with cheaper drones being shot down with very, very expensive missiles. Now, we need to look at that and learn the lessons from what we're seeing there, and to make sure we're providing more flexible air defence cover that is effective against high-end weaponry that we know our adversaries have and are investing in, but also the volume that we will be seeing potentially on the battlefield in the future of much more disposable, cheaper drones and uncrewed systems. So that means our air defence strategy and how we do that needs to not only have one eye on defeating the fastest, the most effective missiles that are on the market globally, but also how we deal with a situation where even getting a few of those drones through could have a profound effect on our critical national infrastructure or how we defend ourselves at the moment. So that is a big challenge I think all Western nations are grappling with, about how you create integrated air defence. And if we are looking to protect not only civilian targets but military targets, as is happening in Ukraine, they don't have enough air defence. They don't have enough air defence to defend everything they need to, and we need to make sure the support is going to Ukraine, but we're learning the lessons of what we're seeing there.
Okay. Now, you mentioned as well in your speech, again, that you were committed to increasing to 2.5% for NATO, to meet those NATO targets of expenditure on defence. The thing is that is still pretty vague, as in there's no timeline. And this question has come through from John Hill, Global Data Defence Reporter. Does the 2.5% GDP defence spending target depend on the findings of the Strategic Defence Review, or will there be a roadmap before that? When can we expect this? I think that is a kind of crucial question that keeps being asked.
Yeah, so in our manifesto, we have a commitment to getting to 2.5% of GDP on defence. That is a commitment that we have and that we will deliver. What we spend that money on is just as important, though. And so at the moment, we spend about 2.32%-ish of GDP on defence. And if we're looking at increasing that over time to 2.5%, that needs to be informed by the Defence Review. So the Defence Review will set out what capabilities we need to have, but also importantly, what sequence. So I want British industry to be ramping up production, not only of munitions to deal with stockpile shortages, but in terms of the capabilities that we need to keep ourselves and our allies safe. Now, the signal that I want to send alongside the Defence Review, that John Healey has set out clearly, is that we want to buy, make, sell more in Britain. Now, that doesn't mean no international collaborations on platforms. Far the opposite. It means making sure there's decent work share in international collaborations and platforms, but it means making sure that we're producing more to be able to support the fight in Ukraine, but also to make sure that our stockpiles are being filled up rather than being emptied as they are currently. So I think all of that happens at the same time. How we get to 2.5% will be laid out by the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, at a fiscal event, which is government code for a budget or an autumn statement. And so looking at that, she will set out the path to that. But actually for me, I think we need to learn the lesson. It's not just total spend. It's about how we spend it as well. At the moment, we're not spending it well.
Ready for conflict with the Treasury?
No, I think we need a new relationship with the Treasury. And so, the old adage is that, the number one enemy of the MOD is the Treasury. Is not always, I think, how we should start this relationship, because we're looking to increase defence spending. We're clear about how that we want to do so. We're clear about the target that we want to get to. We're clear that we want to grow the economy as well. So a larger economy means more defence spending at 2.5%. But to do that, we need a better relationship with the Treasury. We need to make sure that we can be clear about how we're improving procurement, because procurement, which takes up a huge chunk of the MOD's budget, has, I think if we're all being honest with ourselves, not been very efficient, has not always delivered value for money for the taxpayer or for our fighting forces who are spending their top-level budgets on those systems. So we do need a better relationship to make sure that we're driving efficiency. This is something that John Healey's been very clear on from the moment that he was appointed Shadow Defence Secretary by Keir Starmer in 2020, that we need our defence to have a better focus on value for money. Now, that's not just to appease the Treasury. That's because we don't have enough focus on value for money. And if we improve value for money, there is more money to spend on our frontline forces, to spend on the capabilities we need to deter and defeat aggression.
Okay, and you've got this focus as well on growth. But nurturing innovators, this is also a popular, and it is the last question, I'm afraid. Nurturing innovators and startups is difficult in a world of large defence primes. How can this challenge be overcome? What do you intend to do about it?
Well, as a constituency MP as well as a minister, I look at the big firms that operate in my patch. And so you've got Babcock that run Devonport Dockyard, huge defence primes, but you're also seeing SMEs being able to innovate, being able to develop. And so that is a challenge not just in defence, but also for all SMEs, making sure they've got the support, the scale up, the ability to invest. That deals with sometimes the financial environment that looks with perhaps a degree of scepticism about always the viability of investing in defence and security industries. Defence and security is absolutely vital for our country. Having an investment environment that discourages people from investing in our capabilities and our security doesn't seem the right approach to me. So we need to make sure we're giving support. But as part of that, I want primes to also be clear that when they are procuring, they need to be supporting SME growth and supporting them. So they're not just buying widgets from an SME and integrating them. They need to be part of a fuller system. Now that especially means growth on skills, because we don't have enough people with the skills that we need. So it's supporting apprenticeship growth in particular. But perhaps linking to one of the bits in the remarks I just made, it's also about cyber as well. Because it's not sufficient for us to protect the MOD or our services and our primes. We also have to protect our SMEs from the risk of cyber attack, from a risk of information products being stolen or information being attacked on their systems. So I think big businesses have a responsibility to their supply chain to make sure they're being encouraged to grow, encouraged to invest in skills, and encouraged to be safe. And that's quite a big challenge. It's a behaviour change that we want to invest in, but you don't get growth without supporting a real innovation boost from our SME community. So to do that, you need better investment, better skills, and a better focus on ensuring their products are bought and sold.
Okay, well, Minister, thank you very much. And I do appreciate you taking all the questions from the floor and for making your first speech here today. So many thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So following that, really excellent discussion about the challenges facing the UK and beyond, and the critical role which, of course, air and space power can play in solving them, there actually can be few leaders in the world today more qualified to provide an air and space power overview of deterrence, interoperability and integration than our Chief of the Air Staff, Air Chief Marshal Sir Rich Knighton. So please do give him a warm round of applause.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming back for the second day. Thank you also for staying here after the Minister made his speech as well. I said yesterday that part of the role of these conferences is to enable us to build relationships, to get to know each other better, particularly as Air Chiefs. And I'm delighted that over the last year, I've been able to get to know a few more of you and get to know you better. And I think the conference has unquestionably delivered on that intent to help us forge those relationships and get to know each other better. But there's a more important role for conferences like this, which is to help us develop and share ideas. Last year I said we needed to out-cooperate and out-compete our adversaries. I emphasised that we needed to be ready for a different kind of war to the ones we're used to, a war where we will have to fight for control of the air, wars where we will no longer be able to rely on unimpeded supply chains and just-in-time logistics, and wars that might be matters of survival rather than choice, and wars that might affect our homeland. So a year on from that, how does it feel? Well, I can tell you, it doesn't feel like it's improved very much. We have a new Prime Minister, as you've heard, and he said this: "We live in a new and dangerous era, one defined by volatility and insecurity." Russia has continued with its illegal invasion of Ukraine, and many of the air forces here have been involved in operations in the Middle East. And it's perhaps because of this context that defence and security has been more prominent in the general election than at any time I can remember while I've had the vote. We know, as you've heard today, that we're going to have a defence review in the UK. And I'm hopeful that it will engage society in the way that ministers and those writing it want it to, because that is our job as an armed forces, is to protect our country, our people, our interests, and our allies around the world. But what I also hope is in that debate we avoid some of the oversimplification that we have seen to characterise the debate during the election campaign. On the one hand, you have those like Max Hastings who, well, we're all going to hell in a handcart. The world is definitely more dangerous than it's been, I can think of, in the 30 years that I've been in the service. But other commentators, like my old teacher, Michael Clarke, make the point that it is more balanced and more nuanced than we might imagine. The truth is, as the Minister set out, the challenges we face will require judgment and trade-offs, and nothing is risk-free. And because we are talking about the future of our armed forces, it is, by its very nature, uncertain. So we need a frame of reference to help us make some of those decisions. And that's, for me, why I think it's so important that we should talk about and think about deterrence. Our job as the armed forces is ultimately to avoid war. However we might look at it, war is costly, whether we look at it in terms of lives lost, equipment destroyed, or just the financial aspects. And as Victoria said yesterday, Ukraine is an example of failed deterrence, and the cost has been enormous on both sides. Now, my good friend, Patrick Sanders, who's recently retired as head of the army, this is him actually at Glastonbury just after he retired. But he said a few weeks ago that wars are won by citizen armies, and he's right. In the run-up to the Second World War in 1936, we spent 2.9% of GDP on defence. By 1939, we spent 9%. By 1945, we spent over 50%. We paid the last of our debts to America and Canada, thank you for Dave and Slice for that, in 2006. We want to avoid that kind of war. So our job as armed forces is to build those armed forces that can stop us getting into that kind of all-out war. And war is not inevitable. It requires sophisticated thinking, imaginative and sophisticated statecraft, and armed forces that our foes fear and our allies value. But we've heard through this conference that deterrence is hard. It has to operate right across the spectrum of competition, from cooperation at one end through competition and crisis. Rob Chipman, who's the former head of the Royal Australian Air Force, described it, the character of the relationships we have with countries like China and previously Russia, as a complex coexistence of those things. Deterrence have to work right across that spectrum. And in fact, deterrence in fact enables that complex coexistence. Now, we've heard that deterrence requires us to affect the minds of our adversaries. We've been treated to some great theory about the importance of the psychology and understanding what our adversaries value and what they fear. We've heard about general deterrence. We've heard about tailored deterrence. Deterrence by denial, deterrence by the imposition of costs. And we've heard of the 4 Cs: capability, credibility, communicated and comprehended. These are all difficult things to get our minds around. So while yesterday General Saltzman treated us to 2,000 years of history and the writings of Thucydides, I'm going to use a different tool to try to explain some elements of it. And there's a bit of audience participation here, which is some animal videos from the internet. So, first one, let me know what you think this is. Shout it out. What kind of deterrence is this? Anybody? Denial, very good. What about this one?
Nope, stop. Nope, 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 no thank you. I already set my makeup. That's enough setting spray. Nope, I'm good. All right, it's a bit smudged. Thank you, I'm leaving. Goodbye.
That one? Compellence, yeah. Or deterrence by imposition of cost. We don't say punishment anymore. But what we can say from that theory is what we say matters. And what we say at conferences like this shows to our adversaries that we're working together and thinking. But what we do matters more. This is a picture taken at Darwin a couple of days ago. It's exercise pitch black. More than 20 participating nations, many of them represented here. More than 140 aircraft, more than 4,000 people. This is a big deal. Many of those air forces flew literally halfway around the world to be there. Deterrence has to be active, not passive. And hard power really does matter. Now, quite often, the national comparisons are what dominate commentary. But it's our collective strength that always is greater than the sum of its parts when it comes to deterrence. Many of us in this room are part of the greatest military alliance in history, NATO. And when we look at the comparison between Russian capability and NATO capability, the picture's pretty impressive. Even when you remove our North American colleagues, it's still pretty impressive. But this is only impressive if you can join it up and make it work together. And those high-level comparisons can hide weaknesses and gaps that can undermine the deterrent effect. And General Jim Scorch Hecker, you've got to love those American fighter pilots. Scorch is in the room somewhere. Scorch is the commander of the air component for NATO. And he has brilliantly brought clarity to the areas that we need to focus on as air forces to ensure that we enhance the deterrent effect. The first of these starts with command and control. Last year, I introduced the conference to our new air operating concept, where we were channeling the loud, profane, but brilliant John Boyd's thinking to deliver operational advantage through decision superiority, to make faster, better decisions, to do, as the Minister said, it is all-domain warfare, and if we can, to do it internationally. But even if we get that C2 right, we also have to recognise that we're going to have to fight for and win control of the air. Or as Jim would put it, we have to counter the anti-access area denial capabilities of our adversaries. And I'm certain that Justin will have talked about this yesterday. But we also have to make ourselves a harder target. The communique from the NATO summit in Washington talks specifically about integrated air and missile defence. That is a subject of a keynote all by itself. And there's much talk, as you've heard from the Minister, in national capitals about investment in integrated air and missile defence. But for me, this starts with having to be international by design. And it has to be integrated across multiple domains to work. And we must acknowledge that we can't protect everything all of the time. We cannot afford an Iron Dome for Europe. So as part of making ourselves a harder target, we have to enhance our operational agility through the implementation of agile combat employment, where our air forces move their assets around a battle space more rapidly than the intelligence and targeting cycle of our adversaries. So these then are the 4 areas, supported by information sharing, that Jim points out are the things that we as NATO air forces need to do to enhance our deterrent effect. And with 23 nations now committing to spend 2% of GDP or more on defence, we have the opportunity to get after some of these things. But deterrence has to work every day. And we have to be able to deter with what we've got today. If we take the UK, in many ways we're in an enviable position. We have the most modern kit that we've had throughout our history. But we're at danger of what Rob Chipman described as capability stagflation, alongside our other allies as well, where we view the capabilities we have as sufficient for the challenges we face today. And the hollowness that the Minister and our Defence Secretary has talked about in terms of our workforce and our stockpiles risks us not having the Air Force and Space Force that our country needs at a time when it needs it more than it has done for some time. Fixing that, for me, as a priority, starts with our people. And it's surprising when I talk to my colleagues from across the world how similar our challenges are. And things are getting better for most of us, but it's going to take time and constant effort and focus. But it's more than just about people. For the last 25 years, we have focused on efficiency, leaning our systems, and an inexorable drive for greater levels of assurance. And for those of you here last year, you'll recognise this picture. You'll explain it to everybody else. But that system isn't delivering what we need of it and the pace of change that we require today. We can and must get more out of the investment that's already been made. It's not free, but it's cheaper than growing the size of our fleets. But it will require investment in enablers, in infrastructure, in spares, in stockpiles, and in a mindset that is about taking a risk-sensible approach, not a risk-averse or risk-cavalier approach. But as I said, deterrence has to be active, and the threat is changing. Our enemies are watching and learning what is happening in Ukraine, and we're seeing remarkable speed of change in capability delivery there. There's much that we can and will learn from Ukraine, but we also have to be careful that we don't exaggerate the lessons to be learned. You might remember, shortly after the start of the war in Ukraine, the TB2 was king. But it didn't take long for Russia to develop counters to it, both in capability and techniques, so they were able to defeat it. I'm told by one of my fellow chiefs that the TB2 only actually flew 42 missions. I don't know if that's true, but a bit like something Boris Johnson said, it's a fact too good to check. But let me be clear. Let me be clear that autonomous systems, drones, are going to form a fundamental part of our future force structure, and that will solve some of our problems around mass, around survivability and lethality. But it doesn't mean we should throw away all of our modern equipment and imagine we're going to replace it all with cheap drones. The success of Storm Shadow and Scalp missions in Crimea has at its heart the investment that was made in the high technology, the missiles, a number of years ago. It's when we add the layered effects and coupled effects of modern technology and cheaper equipment that you deliver the effect. So I think the future is going to be a mix, a high-low mix, if you like. For our part in the UK, we recently published our Autonomous Collaborative Platform Strategy, ACPs, that describes how we'll develop that technology, that capability, and how it will help enhance our lethality and survivability of the platforms that we have today. And for our part, we are committed to delivering a usable, operationally useful capability by the end of this financial year. So no pressure to my director capability, who's assured me we're going to do that. And this brings me then neatly on to the last thing I want to talk about, which is industry. I know, you know, that we can't do what we need to do without your support. Your capacity, your capability, your creativity, your resilience are all part of our national strength. But our relationship with industry has been affected by those drivers that I talked about a few minutes ago. Over the last 25 years, we have focused on efficiencies. We've prioritised cost and perfection over time. And all of that through firm price contracts for system requirement documents that mean we've built this very transactional relationship. And that model, that relationship, is not going to deliver the rate of change that we need for the future. So that relationship needs to change. Now, we have to be careful in imagining that industry is some kind of monolithic block and one size fits all. It isn't. But it's easier to say and much harder to do. And so we have to be specific. And I think for me, that starts with opening up our architectures and systems and letting the best in the market play. Now, that's going to be uncomfortable for some of the primes. But if we don't do it, we won't be able to apply the best talent to our most significant problems. So on our side, in government, we need to find a route to higher returns on that investment that you might make to put the incentives in place. And those who imagine that the venture capitalist fairy is going to sprinkle money all over us are deluding themselves unless we can find a better route to higher returns. The other component I think that will characterise those future relationships will be partnerships between government and industry, where we'll try to solve specific problems and work on outcomes rather than delivering narrowly defined requirements documents. But our scrutineers in MOD and Treasury and Parliament need to recognise the inherent risk, but the benefit that comes from that. But we're doing it today. We're doing it in Ukraine with British industry, the Royal Air Force working alongside our Ukrainian colleagues to deliver remarkable rates of change. The challenge for us is how do we keep doing that when Ukraine wins and that money dries up? How do we retain that competitive element so we can build and make stuff and sell it from the UK, as the Minister said? And for industry, you're going to need to step up too. So Greg yesterday talked about productivity. So aerospace manufacturing, you might say that's a good story. Productivity's gone up. But maintenance, repair and operations, which is the bit that's going to deliver more output that I described, productivity has fallen over the last decade. And you're also going to have to invest in your research and development. Again, the overall number for aerospace investment, research and development by companies looks pretty good. But look at the yellow line. Defense investment in the defence industry and R&D has declined massively over the last 20 years. I know these are numbers in the UK, and I don't know what it looks like in other nations, but this matters. So as we think about helping the government with their industrial strategy, it should be a focus on speed, on productivity and creativity that we prioritise, not those who lobby loudest. Let me finish by going back to where I started. Our job is to prevent war. We need to build armed forces that can stop that all-out war that I described from starting. That is not just the job of the armed forces. As we heard from Salty yesterday, it requires grand strategy, integration of all the levers of power. But hard power does matter. And if you want military capability that delivers choice, is highly reactive, denies the adversary the space to operate, can strike at what our foes fear and what they value, then air and space power can deliver it. And it's going to be a fundamental part of our deterrent capability going forward. And that's why we will be the front line of defence and our first responders. And my final point, we should remember that what we say matters, but what we do and what we do together matters even more. Thank you very much.
That was great. I didn't think that you would be able to improve on the ninja cats from last year, but I think that the squirrels have the edge. Thank you very much. I'm pleased to say the Air Chief Marshal will be coming back for a Q&A shortly. But now I am very delighted to introduce General David W. Alvin, the Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force, who's speaking at this conference for the first time. Now, he's been a leading advocate of interoperability, integration, and agile operations throughout his distinguished career. So we're really looking forward to hearing him speak today. Please do welcome him.
Well, good morning. First, my thanks to the Air and Space Power Association for putting this together. As was mentioned, this is my first time, and I am very honored to be here. I look out amongst my fellow air chiefs and industry and academia. This is a powerhouse audience. So I'm not going to lie to you. I got a little edge this morning, a little chip on my shoulder, just because this is my first time. And as I look at day two, the threshold for impressing keeps going up and up and up. Each of the panels has been very spectacular. I mean, I get it. We're on the second day. You take your lot in life, and now I'm on the same time block with Minister Pollard and Cass Knighton. Are you kidding me? But that's okay. I'm a guest in their country. I'll speak when I'm told to speak. But I think the straw that broke the camel's back, I mean, you were all here yesterday. My fellow American service chief, General Saltzman. I mean, what the hell was that? I mean, Thucydides to Brody, Athens to space. And it was sophisticated, it was educational, it was comprehensive, it was professorial, and it was downright erudite. And yes, I had to look at the thesaurus last night to see what that word means just so I could impress you. So, high bar. So I'm not even going to try and clear that, because as I was listening, especially with Rich, there's so much in common with the way that I think and the way that he has spoken much more eloquently. So a lot of this is going to be what you've heard and reinforcing, just said a different way. But I figure I got to put more words in it than just say, yeah, what he said. I'll never get invited back. But I want to start the conversation with the way that I start most conversations lately, because you may have heard within our United States Air Force, we are currently undergoing a journey that we're looking at reoptimizing our Air Force, the institution of our Air Force, to adapt to the environment within which we find ourselves. And as we're buying new kit and we're looking at future capabilities, but we need to do some introspection and look at our processes, the way we develop our people, the way we project power, the way we develop capabilities, the way we generate readiness. Are those right for the time? And as we do that, we looked in those four basic areas, and we need to look back and see what our Air Force has done and what we've adapted to. Now, I wasn't good enough to go all the way back to the Peloponnesian War, but I just went back to the Cold War. And when we think about that, we look at what our Air Force was optimized for. How did we project power? From large installations at wings, with wings forward to mature infrastructure within Europe, as we were going galvanized against the Warsaw Pact and going against the Soviet Union coming in the Fulda Gap. So that's how we projected power into these sort of mature infrastructure. We developed capabilities. We knew we couldn't outmass them, so what did we do? We were focused on the threat, and we looked at stealth and precision, and that's how we were going to do it, but we were galvanized against a single threat. And then 9th of November 1989 came. I was fortunate enough to be in Germany at the time. The wall came down, and suddenly the environment shifted. And fairly rapidly, we found ourselves without an existential threat to go against, but we still had our same Air Force. So when Desert Storm came along, we still did like we were going to do in the Cold War, which is we picked up from wings, but we didn't have the forward infrastructure to go into, so we did the same thing into expeditionary bases. Took us 6 months to get there, but that didn't matter. We owned the shot clock. And then after that happened, the Desert Storm happened, then we find ourselves with myriad industry and not too many mouths and not enough to feed them. So, many in industry look back in the history and hear about the Last Supper in summer 1993, when the fact of the matter is we did not have a threat that would justify resourcing. So we did what Rich was talking about. We solved for efficiency. And so that was the extravaganza of mergers and acquisitions in industry, and that changed the relationship to fewer, bigger industry partners, and it changed the behavior in the relationship between us. But we didn't have that existential threat to go against, so we were sort of adapted to that situation. 9/11 came along, and our Air Force suddenly was not really asked to do what it had traditionally been trained to do. We didn't need to go in and roll back the integrated air defense system, establish and maintain air superiority, and set the conditions for an unfair combined arms fight. That's not what we needed to do. They needed us to do on-call close air support, unblinking ISR, ensure the golden hour, we could make sure more and more of the forces that were in combat could survive. Pieces of our Air Force, that's what the Joint Force needed, and that's what the Coalition Force needed. But that's not what our Air Force had been before, so we adapted to that. So the way we projected power was largely by crowdsourcing. We would put together folks and we'd go and meet in the theater, and sometimes that's the first time you'd meet, which was okay for the time. It was okay for the environment. But that's not the way it is anymore. We cannot afford, if we are going to potentially be ready to enter into a fight against a well-armed, well-trained adversary, we can't be meeting up in theater and saying, "Hi, I'm Dave, I'm going to be your commander, let's go get him." Can't do that. You have to train together as a unit, coherently, practice. So all of those things we sort of looked at, this is how we got to where we are. But we're still doing things, in many of the cases, like we were post 9/11, in that environment. There wasn't a seminal event like 9/11 that brought us from that environment to this. And so we have to wake ourselves up and adapt to this and understand that we have to think differently to be ready. So as we did this in the United States Air Force, we started looking at what is it about the environment that is different? What are the unique characteristics of the environment now that are drawing us to have to change the way that we do our processes, our practices, develop capabilities, et cetera? And one of the things, there's several, I'm just going to pull on one thread, was really about, it's not only just the digitization, but it's the pace of change, as Rich talked about, this technological advancement and how fast it's coming at us. It has an impact. And for the last over a century, we've had technological advances that have made our lives better and advanced society and really have done things for us as individuals and as groups that have really changed our lives. But what's happening is it's going faster and faster and faster. So it's not just that technology is advancing in society, it is that pace of change. And when you're in an environment where the pace of change is, dare I say, unprecedented, we have to think about what that means. How much can we trust the past to predict the future? That line is no longer straight. We're living in a nonlinear environment where we may not be able to draw that line as clearly. And so in order to do that, in order to optimize in this sort of environment of rapid change, we also need to reevaluate some of the underlying value propositions that we've had and how we make our decisions. One of the main, I think one of the most popular value propositions of the 20th century was this one, built to last. And that was something, if you did something that was built to last, that had value. But there was an underlying assumption. That assumption was that whatever you were building was going to be relevant for as long as it lasted. That brought the value. I want that for us. It's going to be the dominant X, Y, or Z for the next fill in the blank. We need to think about that, because sometimes that value proposition can become an albatross if it's still functioning, but it's not as effective. And when we think about it, our United States Air Force still has a large majority of its capabilities, if not delivered, at least designed and developed in an environment with this value proposition. So now when we're trying to become agile, we need to be clear-eyed about the fact that it's not going to happen automatically, because some of these systems were not designed with this value proposition in mind. If we had to do it all over again, maybe we'd do something like this. That doesn't really roll off the tongue. Built to adapt. It's not quite as powerful. But this is the paradigm. This is the value proposition we need to be reconsidering more. So built to adapt, and I've been thinking about this for a long time. I wrote on this over 10 years ago. when we put together the then Air Force Future Operating Concept and talked about the concept of operational agility. And I feel more strongly about it today than I did then. And I think when we think about agility, it's a combination of several things that allows you to stay on the balls of your feet. You know you're not going to be fully right in the future, but when you're wrong, you have the ability to get right quicker. And what does that mean? It's a combination of all these attributes. One or two of them might be interesting, but it's a combination of all of them. You can still generate power. You can still take a punch. You can still move. You can get your balance. And some of these you can see, Rich was talking about a little bit. How about a balance of high-low capability? How about the flexibility to move from one domain to another? How about the coordination that comes with command and control? These things relate and they translate very well to what we do in air and space power. And so the idea of solving for agility has become an obsession of mine, because we cannot trust that the past is going to deliver the future in the way that we have envisioned it. So we always say, trust your gut. I'd like to add the Reagan thing on there, say, trust but verify your gut. Make sure those things that you're biased against are still relevant today. And agility is something that exists in nature, and it exists, in air power, if you will. So when you think of what does that take, this paired is speed, strength, agility, coordination. That's a natural thing for us who live and work in the air domain. But I'll tell you, just because you're individually agile, that doesn't guarantee collective agility. I mean, this is... I think we've all been in operations that look like this a little bit. So that individual agility is necessary but not sufficient, because when you have collective agility, the ability to be agile as a formation, as a coalition, as an international fighting force, maybe it looks something a little bit more like this. When you think about that, it's for a collective purpose. How are they doing that? I mean, they are interfacing, communicating, sensing with each other to have a coherent form. I don't know what that formation is trying to do, but they're all sort of acting together and in unison. And there's something to that. That's real power. That is real power in the battle space that I believe we're going to see in the future. And so that's why I think about it as collective agility. How do we do that? How do we move from the individual level to collective agility, especially when we have much of our kit was built and designed in the era of it's most important just to build to last? I think we've had some examples of that. I mean, when in the middle of April, when the Iranians had that mass launch on Israel, we came together as a coalition and in impressive fashion thwarted that. That was collective agility, but it wasn't natural. It happened because of years and years of flying and fighting together. But it also happened on the backs of several airmen, Space Force members, our guardians, putting together on their backs of really hard work that probably was harder than it needs to be in the future, because these systems were not designed to operate together, but we made them, and they worked. I think this is a little bit of a glimpse into the future. I think this is the type of battle space, this is the type that we're going to see, but at larger scale. So the question becomes, how much can we depend upon this stitching together and having effectiveness in the battle space on this scale, night after night, day after day? I mean, we see it in Ukraine on the joint front as well, putting pieces together. Now, there is a necessity there that is driving that innovation faster and faster, but still, this is a collective agility that's hard work, and it's manual labor intensively. How do we get to that point like that flock of birds? When you think about it, theirs is almost biologically developed over years and years and hundreds and thousands. They have sensors. I'm not going to get into the science of it because I'll get out of my depth very quickly, but they have the sensors that communicate with each other as a group, working together. It's natural because it's not just in the hardware, but it's built into their DNA. And this is where we need to start thinking about collective agility. Agility as a platform is interesting. Agility of systems, I think, is compelling. That's why one of the things that we're looking at within our United States Air Force is looking at working systems over platforms. If you think about it historically, we built platforms for a purpose. And on that platform, you need a system. I need radar, I need some EW kit, I need a ComNav suite, I need to be able to have munitions on this. And you build it around the platform. And you've got a magnificent platform that is built to last. Off you go. And then there's another platform that does the same thing, and we spend all our money, time, and resources trying to hook the two of them up together at great expense. But if you have the common set of systems, the common architecture, the common data standards, those things that enable, regardless of the platform, to fit together as long as they share this systems approach, now you have the ability to upgrade at the speed of software, at the speed of coding. And you think about the platforms as the wrappers that you put around those systems. Then you can have a balanced capability mix and know how to talk to each other because it's at the systems level they are integrated. That's what I believe the future is. How we get there, I got to tell you, there's all sorts of reasons why it's tough, right? Each of our nations has that. We have our own policy, and industry has incentives as well that sometimes are at odds. And Rich talked about this, that we have to adapt industry and government. We have to adapt together to understand how we can still both meet our own objectives and develop capabilities that are right for the time. How do we do that? We're moving out on that in the United States Air Force. Now, admittedly, this is not going to happen overnight because, as I said, we still have a large amount of our kit that was not designed that way. But we have an opportunity now, together, as international forces, to think about how we do this. Because if you design it in, if you bake it in rather than bolt it on, you have a better opportunity to be collectively agile and to be able to dominate the battle space in air and space because your systems are talking together regardless of the platforms around which they develop. And you can move from an air force, which is a set of international air forces that are powerful unto themselves, but maybe not collectively, and move it into a formation that is true power at scale, at speed, in the dynamic battle space that we see. So I think we can do this together. I think the environment calls for it, and I think this is the edge that we can deliver over potential adversaries. So with that, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Many thanks, General. Thank you. Please do take that far seat there. Thank you. And I'm delighted thank you. Chief can also join us for this Q&A. So we don't have too much time, so I want to rattle through some of the questions that we have, which have come through. So recruitment and retention is absolutely a key challenge for so many Air Forces represented. So we have this very popular question: declining pay in real terms and increasing demand on our people to be agile and deployable are in direct tension. What to do? Can I ask you first, General?
Well, thank you for that. I think when we think about recruiting and retaining our force, I think we need to look back the last couple decades, at least in the United States Air Force, after 9/11, there was this tendency across the nation to say, we got this. The military, we've got it, and we sort of separated the military from the nation. Just go on about your business. And so it became harder and harder to connect with society and the military because we're out fighting the war, but you act as though nothing's happened. So this getting the country ready to understand that this is a sacrifice, it's a shared sacrifice, it's what we need to do as a nation has been challenging. But the other thing that we need to work on is understanding and communicating that this is not a transactional relationship. This is not something that we're going to outcompete industry or we're going to beat the economy. We need to reflect that this is something that you do sacrifice for, but you are joining a winning and elite team. And here's what we can offer you to be on that team, and here's what we expect you to be on that team. So you move from a transactional relationship to an intrinsic value relationship, and I think that's what we need to work on more importantly, because if we're going to compete transactionally, we are going to be only as healthy as the inverse of the economy being healthy, if that makes sense. The worse off the economy, the better off we are, and vice versa. And we cannot exist in that sort of environment.
Okay, thank you.
Kind of what he said. So I don't know anybody who joined the armed forces because they wanted to make their fortune. That's not how it works. We all join for slightly different reasons, but all of us have some sense of duty and responsibility and service, and that's what Dave's describing. And wherever we've seen it, our aviators have stood up to that challenge. But as the Minister said, there there are a whole bunch of things that affect our individuals' views of the service, and we need to recognise those things. But it starts with, as Dave said, the team that we're part of. People stay in organisations where they feel valued, where they feel heard, where they feel as though they can evolve and develop as humans and their skills. And so that, for me, is the focus for it. Working across a broad front to try to ensure that we think through what it is that's going to make people want to stay, but equally recognising that nobody's going to get rich working in the armed forces, so that service and making people feel valued is what really matters.
What did you make of the approach from Norway and Nordic Air Chiefs and offering greater flexibility, even like to the extent of oil rig workers, for example? Is that something that could work? I'm not quite sure whose mic's playing up here, but...
Mine. Right. I'm not sure what's going on here, but thanks very much. So I'm not going to get drawn into a question about conscription, which is, I know exactly what you were trying to do. But but to Dave's point, that there is a connection that's required between the armed forces and society. So I think part of this solution will be much greater use of reserves in the future, but also it starts with explaining what we do so that our young people can look at it and think, I want to be part of that. I want to defend our country. I want to defend our people, our interests around the world. And I think through that, there are a whole bunch of different models that we can work on, whether it's through our reserves and cadet forces, that will help us engage with society and attract them into the Air Force. And we're seeing really good statistics, 25% plus increase in expressions of interest, over 40% more applicants to the Air Force this year than the previous year. So there are positive signs, but as I said, it's going to require constant effort.
Thank you very much. A question for you, General. Many of the challenges, actually, that's just gone, but here it is. Is there a risk to resilience if a future system shares common DNA?
Yeah. I thought about that as I was developing the slides, and it is a good question. There is always risk, but I do believe that now with the advent of multi-level security and different protocols and zero trust type of approaches, there is a way that we can both satisfy the ability to share as well as the ability to protect. And I think we're seeing some of that in the way that we're developing our entire NGAV family of system, which includes collaborative combat aircraft and this sandbox that you play in that has a reference architecture that is common to many, and so many can come and play in that shared architecture while still preserving the proprietary value, if you will, of your own kit. So I think it's easier with software than with hardware, quite frankly, and I think that's something we're going to have to lean into, but I think it's very doable.
Thanks very much. So there has been a recent message, and this comes to the point that you just made earlier about you've had a higher number of applications to the RAF. A recent message from HQ Air to frontline command was, we're through the worst of our recruitment and retention issues. Is this really the case, and are you just trying to send a good message here, or a less worse message?
So we're definitely not through it. That's my whole point. I've definitely never said that. So whoever thinks that, I didn't say that. I found as chief, actually, people think you said things you haven't said. No, this is going to take years to turn around, and it's a constant effort. Our performance in recruitment and retention has to outperform, over the next few years, has to outperform everything we've done over the past decade. That's how hard this is, but we've got to do it. We owe it to the country to do it. So no, things might be improving, but we are nowhere near there yet. So this is going to require constant effort.
And were you reassured by what the Armed Forces Minister had to say about that?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, really good.
So this is a question which has come through from Colonel Deflo from France. We're looking at making sure the best of today's technology is made available for today, but we face a long regulatory process. Do you think we can change our approach on airworthiness and risk acceptance to accelerate new capacities integration to timely respond to threats?
Yes. Short answer. So we've been doing some work on a thing we describe as high-risk capability, and it's recognising that when you get into a conflict, your risk judgments and balance between opportunity, kind of benefit and risk changes. So quite a lot of the cost that comes with bringing a new capability into service is driven by certification and assurance and to built to last, exactly as Dave describes. And we've seen, actually, through some brilliant work that the Military Aviation Authority has been doing to support the development of drones and their use in Ukraine, how we can use the same kind of analysis but come to different judgments and conclusions if we conclude that we're not going to try to operate those assets in UK airspace, for example. And what we know is quite a lot of these things we're only ever going to train with in the simulator, and then we're going to use them for real. And if we do that, then you can take out orders of magnitude of cost and increase the pace at which you can deliver them into service. It carries with it some risk, but my point is you can accept that level of risk in an environment where the operational imperatives are really significant. So yeah, we can definitely do that.
I would like to add on to that, because Rich said it very well, but this idea of risk, and it was sort of what I was trying to allude to as well. When you have a seminal event that it wakes up a nation, or you understand the consequences and the change in the environment, I would say we haven't had one of those for a while. And so risk is really all about the value versus the downside, the consequences of it. But if you haven't come to grips with the fact that the environment is changing and the risk of inaction is going up, it's easy to hang on to those old risk paradigms and say, well, this isn't the way we used to do it, and I know that in the past X, Y, or Z. But you have to recognize that the risk of inaction, that whole risk equation has changed, and until we come to a collective understanding, we're going to constantly be fighting questions like that, because change is hard, but we have to open our eyes and look at the risk of inaction. And risk to share is no longer as high as it was before, and we've seen that.
So there's a question on the challenges here in operating internationally or as part of a large alliance. So the question is, this is in the ability to share information and data. So how do you view what needs to change here and what means there is to improve information sharing?
To the latter, I think the need to improve in information sharing is fundamental, and it goes across the board. But the manner in which you do it, it needs to give comfort to those who believe that they're accepting risk. And so whether it's a step-by-step approach, but we better take those steps faster and faster, we need to be able to have the mitigating factors and understand the source of the cost that people are not willing to bear versus the benefits. And until we do that, we're still going to be stuck in the old paradigm. But I think there are ways we can take the steps. I mean, when we look at the information sharing, for God's sake, what happened just ahead of the Ukraine war was interesting. And that's information intelligence sharing and all sorts of other things. But one could look back and say that was some of the best risk we've taken in a long time. Because absent that, there might have been a little bit more of a fait accompli. And so I think understanding which steps, what is the true source, the actual source of the potential cost, and addressing that, and then once you can assuage those concerns, then you go that step, and when you see that, well, okay, the Earth didn't stop rotating, let's move to the next step, et cetera. I think that's how we have to move our way through it, but quickly.
Okay, thank you. A question for you, Chief Marshal. Readiness is often eclipsed by procurement in priorities, but the quality of readiness often is the difference between success and failure. And it's the point that obviously you've been as well making, General. How do you view the balance of priority to ensure the force is truly ready, which itself aids deterrence?
Well, I try to cover that in my remarks. So deterrence has to work all of the time, and so we have to deter with what we've got, as well as think about the actions we're taking to evolve that capability to deal with that changing threat. So, like all things in life, it actually is a difficult balance and a trade-off that you have to constantly make. Because you kind of want both, right? You want high readiness, operational readiness now, but also you want to make sure that your equipment is being developed and ready for the future. There are a few things, though, that are changing in access to technology which enable that to happen more effectively. I talked about the need for us to get more out of what we've got, and that's about enhancing productivity, it's about investing in some of the enablers. But as we see our capability increasingly delivered through adjustments to software-defined, wrapped around the software, wrapped around the platforms wrapped around the software, that will provide us with a means of constantly upgrading and developing our capability. And we already do that really impressively, and the UK is a real leader in this in terms of electronic warfare. Our ability to learn from what our assets tell us as they're in the battle space, to adjust our programs and our software so that the next mission we're better able to see and understand the electromagnetic environment. So I think that the challenge is we need to do both. Right now, my focus is absolutely, given we're a pretty modern Air Force, on trying to make sure that we get the most out of what we've got and make us ready with the kit we've got. But we cannot be blind to the future. I say technology, software, but particularly also autonomous systems will provide us with a route of upgrading and updating that capability faster than we've enjoyed in the past.
Thank you, General. Do you have further thoughts here?
I like thinking about, we talk about the balance and the tension between readiness and modernization. I think they're both readiness, just readiness today versus readiness tomorrow. And so when you think about it that way, it's managing across time. And as we, in our U.S. National Defense Strategy, we identify the PRC as the pacing challenge. And I will not, whether it be actual or attributed to me, pick a date, right? That's fraught with peril. But we know that there are times in the future when people will pick times and say, well, we need to be ready by this, we need to be ready by that. The thing we need to remember is whatever date you pick, there's going to be a day after. And the more you focus everything on that date, you're going to be less ready the day after. So it has to be across time, which is why understanding and appreciating the fact that we still have a bunch of legacy force that is still, it's harder to update and modernize in the way we need to. My focus is, let's just not build new kit that way. Let's start now in the way that we're built to adapt so we won't have to go through this legacy modernization challenge that we have right now.
Another question for you, General. How is the US Air Force integrating cutting-edge technologies like AI, swarming, hypersonic weapons, etc., into its operations? And you talked about the pace of technological change in your speech. Just give us an overview of how you're viewing these.
I'll give it in a way of an example, because we are going as fast as we can to integrate it because the technology is moving that fast. And so traditionally, and I'll make a stereotype to make the case, is that you will develop a capability, and then after you develop the capability, you will look at what sort of modernization you can put on it, and then you'll also look at how are you going to employ it. We're doing all three of those at once in our collaborative combat aircraft, for example. We are already down selecting to 2 companies to build the platform. At the same time, we are investing in the autonomy, and you probably saw very famously our secretary went up in one of the F-16s that had the autonomy, one of the companies that's developing the autonomy baked into it. And so we're developing the autonomy at the same time, and at the same time, we have money invested in an experimental operational unit at the same time to figure out when this all comes together, how fast can we bring that speed to ramp and make operational capability out of it. But integrating artificial intelligence and autonomy into our systems, not only into our new systems, but how do we now reverse engineer that into our legacy system to something we're moving as fast as we can. But it's simultaneity rather than in parallel, in serial.
Thank you. And on a similar theme, Sir Rich, how would you address the invest R&D versus productivity ratio that you highlighted in your speech? How do you balance this conundrum, manage risk, particularly for capability investment, return on investment longer term, and delivering what's required today to enable us to fly and fight and win if conflict is likely by 2028?
You picked a date. So I think that the clear requirement for us in the UK and the Royal Air Force is to take the really incredible investment that the taxpayers made in the Royal Air Force and make sure we get the most out of it. And so that's the priority for me, after people, it's around those enablers, spares, stockpiles and the like, to get the most out of it. But as I said earlier, we can't close our minds to the need to evolve and develop that capability. And it's the availability of technology, software, particularly digital, but also autonomous systems and the synthetic environment that will enable us to evolve that capability and technology. And we do, as Dave said, we've got to kind of move out on both of those things. Now, we will also always have to make trade-offs. And in the short term, I'll trade off, my priority will be around people, infrastructure enablers first, and then working out how we, through the use of open architectures, open systems, exploitation of digital synthetic environment and autonomous systems, enhance that capability in a more affordable fashion.
Okay, thank you. Another one, if you could take this, General. Much of commercial sector innovation is delivered as a service. Where do you see commercial capabilities as a service being helpful for your Air Force?
I probably have Salt to come back on the stage, because I got to tell you, we're learning a lot from the way that they're integrating it into the Space Force. But I think there are elements of AI and the development of the autonomy separate from the military application, just the development and the use cases of it. I think that is really where we're seeing a lot of that happen. That's probably where we're most invested in learning from that together, is in the sort of the autonomy and AI space. When we talk about human-machine teaming, I think that's where our United States Air Force needs to go in the future. Collaborative combat aircraft are part of it, but when we think about human-machine teaming, a lot of times we think about what can the machines do better that can sort of offload our time or whatever, but there's human performance optimization that can happen with human-machine teaming, and a lot of that is being done in the fitness space, in the wellness space, and those sort of things can be adaptable to how we can make sure that we can be better accountable and understand our own human performance, because that any edge we can get, we'll take, and I think that's another area we're very interested in investing in.
Okay, well,
Could I just add very quickly onto that? So I think one of the things that's changed really dramatically in the last 30, 40 years has been the source of the technology that we employ or most likely to employ. 40, 50 years ago, that was coming out of military government-owned laboratories, largely in Northern Europe, North America. That has changed. And if you can see, I didn't put them up there, but there's a whole bunch of charts that show where R&D investment is being made in the world. And it's being made by commercial entities. And that kind of democratized the availability of some of that technology. But we've got to get better at exploiting that and using that.
Well, thank you very much. Now, there is just one last question I'd like to ask both of you. We are running out of time, and I want you to have a chance to stretch your legs. What do you value most from your allies and partners?
Honesty and friendship.
And I was going to say common values, which means common trust and common approaches.
Well, thank you very much to both of you. It's been a real delight to have you both on stage answering all of the questions from the floor and for your very, very valuable insights. So please do give them a round of applause. Coffee, gold badge holders can go upstairs. There's coffee also available down here as well.
we ensure our partner air forces have the combat air capability they need.
Focusing on tomorrow isn't enough. That's why we innovate for what comes after next.
With us, the UK is equipped with sovereign combat air power wherever and whenever it needs it.
We don't stop at technologies. We're making a positive impact on our wider society, developing skills, strengthening supply chains, and striving for net zero.
We're building strategic relationships on a local, national, and global scale.
Our people are everything. We're creating a culture that values diversity and celebrates innovation.
Together, we are unleashing the power of combat air.
Today's battle space is the most contested since the Cold War. Regional adversaries are not bound by regional constraints. Our challenges are physical and cyber, with a global reach. At Lockheed Martin, we understand these threats require a 21st century security approach, where battlespace assets are edge devices, seamlessly and securely sharing information at 5G speeds to enable rapid decision-making when it matters most. Where an F-35 instantly shares critical information across air, land, sea, space, and cyber, and compare with hypersonics, directed energy, and other emerging technologies to deliver converged effects. We are the only company with platforms and integration expertise across all domains. Our unmatched first-hand knowledge can help multiply the power of our partners' assets. And that's why our 21st century vision provides our customers a decisive edge and serves as a powerful deterrent to future conflict. Lockheed Martin, partnering for security and prosperity.
We are defined by the questions we ask and the challenges we take on. When will sustainable be the standard? Will data be the difference? Can materials be lighter? Can they handle 5,000 degrees? How can travel be transformed? How will we make the world safer? Decisions faster? Are seamless communications the key? Can what's up there help us down here? Is human ingenuity limitless? Is our true potential endless? At RTX, we take on the big challenges. We ask the big questions, and we find answers. We are RTX.
Hi, welcome to Northrop Grumman. Let me show you what we do. Are you ready? This is where we push the laws of physics. Always something new in here.
This is where we're creating the future of connectivity.
From the bottom of the ocean to the expanse of space.
This is where we put massive power into the microscopic.
That's the future of supercomputing.
You want to see engineering imitating life?
This is where we teach machines to go where humans can't. And this is where we engineer tomorrow's solutions in space.
I love being up here.
You see, the technology we make is what makes the impossible possible.
And it doesn't stop there.
As a member-led organisation, it's important for me to travel around the world meeting people who work in the industries we represent. Today, I'm in my home country of Wales visiting one of our corporate partners, meeting some of our members working in aerospace manufacturing and seeing some of the innovation that's happening in the aerospace sector right now. It's an exciting time for space, aviation and aerospace as our sector focuses on making huge technological advances to address the climate challenge. If you work or want to work in the aviation, aerospace or space sectors, joining the Society can provide you with a lot to help you on your journey. I'd encourage you to reach out to the Royal Aeronautical Society. If you're thinking of joining or would like to know anything about getting more involved in our work, head to our website, drop us an email or visit our social media pages.
We ensure our partner air forces have the combat air capability they need.
Focusing on tomorrow isn't enough. That's why we innovate for what comes after next.
With us, the UK is equipped with sovereign combat air power wherever and whenever it needs it.
We don't stop at technologies. We're making a positive impact on our wider society, developing skills, strengthening supply chains, and striving for net zero.
We're building strategic relationships on a local, national, and global scale.
Our people are everything. We're creating a culture that values diversity and celebrates innovation.
Together, we are unleashing the power of combat air.
Today's battle space is the most contested since the Cold War. Regional adversaries are not bound by regional constraints. Our challenges are physical and cyber, with a global reach. At Lockheed Martin, we understand these threats require a 21st century security approach, where battlespace assets are edge devices, seamlessly and securely sharing information at 5G speeds to enable rapid decision-making when it matters most. where an F-35 instantly shares critical information across air, land, sea, space, and cyber, and compare with hypersonics, directed energy, and other emerging technologies to deliver converged effects. We are the only company with platforms and integration expertise across all domains. Our unmatched first-hand knowledge can help multiply the power of our partners' assets. And that's why our 21st century vision provides our customers a decisive edge and serves as a powerful deterrent to future conflict. Lockheed Martin, partnering for security and prosperity.
We are defined by the questions we ask and the challenges we take on. When will sustainable be the standard? Will data be the difference? Can materials be lighter? Can they handle 5,000 degrees? How can travel be transformed? How will we make the world safer? Decisions faster? Are seamless communications the key? Can what's up there help us down here? Is human ingenuity limitless? Is our true potential endless? At RTX, we take on the big challenges. We ask the big questions, and we find answers. We are RTX.
Hi, welcome to Northrop Grumman. Let me show you what we do.
Are you ready? This is where we push the laws of physics. Always something new in here. This is where we're creating the future of connectivity. From the bottom of the ocean to the expanse of space.
This is where we put massive power into the microscopic.
That's the future of supercomputing. You want to see engineering imitating life? This is where we teach machines to go where humans can't. And this is where we engineer tomorrow's solutions in space. I love being up here. You see, the technology we make is what makes the impossible possible. And it doesn't stop there.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back. And a warm welcome to our last specialist session for this conference. And we're focusing now on a subject which, of course, challenges all of us, that of embracing emerging technology and its critical role in achieving effective deterrence. And we're certainly struck by the comments made by the General in the last session about how the pace of change is unprecedented. So I'm very pleased to say we are joined by a very expert panel to give us some greater insights into this. They'll be making some opening speeches, and then you'll have an opportunity to ask Q&A via the Slido app, but also we'll have roving microphones in the room as well. So please do give a warm welcome to Professor Angela McLean, who is the UK Government's Chief Scientific Advisor, Air Marshal Johnny Stringer, who's the Deputy Commander for NATO's Allied Air Command at Ramstein, Germany, and last but not least, Mike Paco Benitez, who many of you know. He is now Director of Product from Shield AI. Welcome to you all. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Angela to make the first opening statement. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. So first of all, thank you very much indeed for the invitation to be here with you. My name's Angela McLean. My role is I'm the Government Chief Scientific Advisor for the United Kingdom. I used to be the Chief Scientific Advisor for the Ministry of Defence, so I did that job from the autumn of 2019 until the spring of 2023 when I took over this job. So really my job now is to make sure that all policy decisions made in the UK government are informed by excellent science advice, relevant science advice, right at their very heart. And it's my job to make sure that that advice is, as I say, relevant, heard, and understood. What I can't always do is make sure that it's acted on. And I think one of the things I would really like to share with you today is our sometimes despair, actually, when we offer over science advice, and for reasons that we think are not particularly good reasons, it is not acted on. But we are civil servants and advisors, not elected politicians, and so we have to accept that. I'm sure many of you in your daily lives hear the phrase strategic advantage through science and technology. It's a source of constant discussion for us in the science advice community in the United Kingdom. And in the office that I run, called the Government Office for Science, we actually have a unit whose job it is to provide what we would call technology and science insights. And what we mean by that is, well, what are we good at as the UK? What are our allies good at? And what's the rest of the world good at? And I wanted to share a couple of insights that have come from that work, which I think are relevant to our discussions today. I think, in particular, the way that works is that we have a list of technologies, we have a list of countries, and we have a list of different ways we might mean good. So good might be how many peer-reviewed publications do you have, how many patents have you issued, how many spin-out companies are there, how much growth funding is there, that sort of thing. And of course, if you do that kind of exercise, the thing that absolutely, well, several things jump out, but I think the one that is most relevant for this audience is the shift of prowess with the rising science and technology prowess in the East. So, in particular, I'll give you a couple of examples. In many, many technologies, China now holds the lead, absolutely, in science and technology patents. In 2021, India overtook the UK in total number of scientific papers, and in that same year, China overtook the US in total number of scientific papers. And I think we shouldn't kid ourselves that that's just because they're writing lots and lots of papers and they're not good papers, and we're the ones who are really great at doing innovative, clever things. That's simply not true anymore. There is superb science and technology coming out from many countries all around the world. And that shifting balance of power is not that we're getting worse, it's that other parts of the world are getting better faster than we are. And of course, fundamentally, that's an incredibly good thing. Think about how the expectation of life and quality of life of our communities improved during our own industrial revolution and indeed has continued to improve through the application of science and technology across all sorts of arenas. But of course, it does have profound implications for profoundly competitive arenas like defence and security. So continuing to track those kinds of shifts in which country is getting really good at which technology, we believe is a really important exercise as it helps us to decide where to invest our own money and where to look for partners to co-invest with and to collaborate with. Another part of the work that goes on in my office, the Government Office for Science, is horizon scanning to ask questions about, well, which new technologies are coming to change our lives. And of course, we spent a lot of time over the last, well, ever since I've been in post, particularly thinking about how will AI change our lives. Quite a lot of focus on AI safety in this country, and I'm very glad to say now a big growing focus on AI opportunity. And as a scientist myself, one of the things I did want to talk about very briefly was the tremendously exciting opportunities for science in the age of AI. I don't have any slides, but I brought along this very beautiful book produced by the Royal Society about the opportunities, promise, and indeed risks of how is science going to change as AI becomes an ever more powerful tool, an ever more powerful adjunct to the way we imagine and think about things. And I recommend that document to you. You can find it at the Royal Society's website. But I also wanted to share with you an experience I had whilst visiting the Sanger Institute in Cambridge. It's probably not an institute many of you would know because it's the UK's predominant institute for sequencing genomes, storing genome data, and analysing that data. We were there learning about what they do, and we were talking to a research leader there whose research interest is not how can I predict the shape of a protein, because that's an area where there's massive progress been happening recently. I don't know how many of my MOD colleagues will remember the day I sent them an email on the day of the publication of basically the cracking of this problem of the protein folding problem. I sent an email out across all of my senior colleagues in the MOD saying, you should remember this day, because that problem has stood for 50 years and it's been solved, and the outcomes will be astonishing. And most of them wrote back to me saying, well, thank you. I have no idea what you're talking about, but thank you for letting me know. So there are still, of course, lots of other very interesting problems. And this colleague was working on the question not of what is the shape of a protein, but how well will two proteins stick together? Because that's another very, very strong determinant of how they'll function. And he was explaining what he was doing. And I said to him, yes, but aren't you going to have to do 40 years of data collection before you're going to have enough data to drive a really good AI model of what's going on here? Because that's fundamentally what happened with the protein folding problem. So to take a little step back, the problem of protein folding has stood for 50 years. We can determine the shape of a protein, we can read the DNA sequence of a protein, but until a couple of years ago, we could not read the sequence and then say, and without doing the experiment, this is the shape it will fold up into. Because it folds up in this sort of very complicated way, a bit like, can you imagine twisting a piece of string and it would fold in a rather complicated way? But the thing about proteins is they always fold the same way. So what DeepMind did was they took this amazing database of protein sequences and structures that had been collected collaboratively from across the whole world for decades and decades and decades, and they trained a model on it, and it turned out that that kind of model was a particularly successful way of solving this problem. But we don't have that same kind of database for protein-protein interaction. So hence my question to the colleague. And he said the following thing to me, which really changed the way I think about the future. He said, no, Angela, it's not going to take me 40 years to collect the data, because with the model, I know exactly which piece of wet experimentation to do. I know which protein I must make and watch it stick and unstick to another protein in order to make the biggest advances in my model. So with this combination of using an AI model trained on the data I've already got and wet laboratory experimentation, I'm going to be able to make the progress that took 40 years for the protein folding problem, he reckoned in 2 or 3 years for the protein binding problem. And I think that's a really profound thing he was explaining to me, that what we've been used to so far was AI models that were trained on huge databases of existing data, or AI models that were trained because we knew all the rules that mattered, so we could set them off to just generate their own data by playing games in the cloud. But there's this third new way, which is about having an AI model coupled with experimental wet lab data that is your representation of the real world, that is going to, I think, profoundly change the rate at which we make new scientific discoveries, and not only in protein binding. So finally, to come back to deterrence, there were a couple of things said this morning that I thought were, well, there were many things said this morning that I thought were super, super interesting. There were 2 I wanted to refer back to. General Alvin's call for collective agility, I thought was profoundly important. And it seemed to me that his video of a murmuration of starlings was very beautiful, but also very useful, because I think, because I'm a biologist, what we know about starlings is that there isn't an overall plan. Each little starling has a couple of simple rules. We can certainly make a very good simulation of a murmuration of starlings with 2 rules. One says, don't be on the edge, because that's pretty dangerous. And the other says, don't be too close to any of the others, because you mustn't crash into them. And I think that I'm sure you've all already thought of this, but let us not lose sight of that idea, A, of learning from nature when we can, and B, of a very distributed kind of intelligence as being the way that biology often solves problems. I'm out of time, so I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Professor McLean, the government's chief scientific advisor, but also a real communications expert, because that is often the challenge in science, and you just showed expertly how it should be done. So thank you very much. Can I hand over now to Johnny Stringer?
Who will inexpertly show how it's not done. What a pleasure. What a pleasure to talk today. I was delighted yesterday, the number of questions which were NATO related. Those who were here 5 years or so ago, I would say there was probably 1 gusting 0 questions about NATO, and it's a delight to see so many NATO air chiefs here amongst our friends and colleagues as well. I've got 10 minutes or so. I'm going to play very fast and loose with what I've been asked to talk about, because I think there's some other things which one can say about innovation. And we're going to kick off with a bit of subliminal audience participation. So the first mental picture I want you to draw, please, is 6th gen. And then the second one is missile defense and layered defense. And if I remember, I'll come back to both of them. My apologies as well for the non-Brits. There may be a couple of UK cultural references that come up in the in my pitch. So badger anybody in light blue afterwards to explain who Sergeant Wilson is and the Thunderbirds. One other thing, if I may, because I'm very conscious that, you know, any UK officer talking at the moment on the launch of a defence review is always going to be seen as putting subliminal messages into things. So genuinely, I'm not going to do that at all. And I'll just put a few bold facts out. What I would ask to friends and colleagues in the media is, let's just ensure that between now and the launch, the findings of the review, that we have a quality in the discussion that was there in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, but I think has been lost in the last 20 years or so, and I'll come back to that. Final, I did ask, by the way, for some North Korean. I want rattles, I want applause, I want tears, I want a whole lot. So as I run my countdown clock down here, I'll offer one other thought. One of the beauties of coming late in the conference is you generally have time to think on the themes, the insights, Greg Bagwell's footwear that came up on day one. The downside is a lot of these sandwiches are eaten. So in that spirit, let me try and build a bit on what CSAF and Kaz spoke about earlier as a backdrop. We've had a lazy 3 decades. We won the Cold War, we didn't have to think too much about stuff, and that's the first long shadow over our air and space power. The second, slightly shorter shadow is 2 decades or so of counterinsurgency operations. So one thing I would say in this audience is we've hitched our star at times correctly to other people. But we need to make sure that in the air and space domains, we're hitching our star or our wagon or whatever it may be to the importance of the 2 domains. And without going into massive detail, you heard comment yesterday on NATO's family of plans, which genuinely is the best plans framework we've had in years for how we deal with Russia. I'll put a few things out there right now. There's kind of 5 of them. No matter which plan we may have to activate, we're going to have to do some things. One is integrated air and missile defense to protect all of NATO's nations. We're going to have to deal with the anti-access area denial bubbles. By the way, a great discussion to be had over whether we have a philosophy in air power. And again, if I don't run the clock down, I'll come back to it. The third is how we deal with the Russian surface and subsurface. The fourth is we have to keep strategic lines of communication open. And the fifth is we have to deal with the long-range aviation threat in a way we've not had to deal with before. All 5 of those rely on air and space. So a phrase or term I hate is enabling. It's passive, it's soft, wrong. Air and space power is foundational for how NATO will need, God forbid, to fight and prevail. It is not optional and it's not passive. Our adversaries have learnt from our way in warfare. If I'm being really blunt, and I'll put a question mark in on the 3rd bullet, it's not actually, it's a tick. Our evolution is in lag. We have polished second offset strategy. And some folk here would have probably heard me say it before. I think one of the things the US did, though it was never couched as such, is it got its 5 T's absolutely right from the very late 60s and through the 70s, by which I mean it thought about technology, its overall thinking was right, it translated it to tactics. That then came into training. No surprise that this is the foundational decade of red flag, something which we in NATO are seeking to replicate this year with Ramstein flag. And the 5th T is it spoke to a theory of victory. For innovation, I really worry, and I realise I'm off the pace, I'm an idiot who lives in the Rhineland, though by the way, great to see 2 history graduates speaking to you in 24 hours, CSO and myself. But if I come back to looking at the landscape I saw in the UK 2 years ago, having done a year with a tech startup, we're talking the right things, but our mindset has not moved on. And if we're really serious about this, we should not be putting on the constructs in a commercial and a process way for a £1 billion contract for something that's £1 million. So I'm not sure we have generated what I've said there as a culture, but it's more than culture, it's the processes that go with it. You've heard from a number of speakers about the reinvestment in equipment. That is vital, but let's make sure we've reinvested in the conceptual component as well. There is no point spending 3% of GDP badly when you can spend 2.5% better. And what we have to do, and this is really the theme here, I'm not going to talk, and I'm not talking now, about what I would call performative innovation. I'll put a hoodie on, some sneakers, point to the coffee machine and the bean bags, and I'm really cool with the kids. What I'm actually talking about is the things we can do and are doing in NATO. So to answer Greg's challenge from yesterday on the how, what I want to do is focus on just 2 of the 5 priorities that Rich highlighted as my commanders. So I'll talk about IAMD. So right, back to the first subliminal word association, football. If we were talking about layered air defence, how many of you had hemispheres in your mind? One of them V-SHORAD, one medium, one long, all are at a defended point. Wrong. We just have to move on from that. And there's a really interesting back to the future here. NATO realised this in the 1950s, commissioned a series of very important and insightful reports. I would love to declassify the 28-page that was in my inbox last week, because it shows how many of these themes are consistent. First British cultural reference. Sergeant Wilson is the fantastic NCO in Dad's Army. Just about every comment Sergeant Wilson offers begins with, "Would you mind awfully?" And our approach to IAMD has been Sergeant Wilson. We talk about air policing. It has a comfortable constabulary feel about it. We need to be much more hard-nosed. We need to go back to the sense that what we're actually talking about is air defence, how we organise ourselves to do that. To my final bullet, this is everything from how we sense, understand, command and control to the effectors that are required. It is a genuinely multi-domain game, this one. And mentioned earlier high-low, and I know high-low is a good shorthand. Actually, there are various levels of stratification here as to what we should be buying and funding and where we position it. And for obvious reasons, I won't go into too much detail, but I would say that we are looking at IAMD as an overall mission in Aircom and taking it back to first principles. Let me riff a little bit on bullet 3. Lots of talk on mass. Absolutely right. There is a wonderful documentary from World War II somewhere on YouTube of the 24-hour Wellington, by which 24 hours to build a Wellington medium bomber. How long to build an F-35, or a Gripen E, or a Rafale, or a Typhoon? So we've got to think about what mass looks like and how we regenerate it. So that's the sort of physical bit. Also, cleverness, ingenuity, and a bit of cunning in how we use what we've got. So, for example, very clever mission planning, layering of systems means I send 2 very high-end and expensive things. I don't send 10. So I've just 5-fold increased my effective mass. Back to conceptual reinvention rather than just chasing pound signs. And the bit which people probably don't want to hear, but we've got to be honest about it, is air defence done properly over the decades has relied on the offensive as well as the defensive. Sitting there thinking you're going to shoot every arrow that comes with you is frankly for the birds, murmuring or not. And at the enterprise level, this means interdicting supply chains, factories, logistics, well before things actually get fired. So left of launch has many aspects to it. Then the second bit is innovation in Air C2. I underlined the first bit because those are just the classic bromides that people at conferences like this throw out. You'd agree with all of it, but it means nothing. The bits underneath it are important. So what are we doing right now? And we've already started testing some of this. Take the classic 2 levels of centralized command, decentralized execution, and unpack the first one into 2 strands. So absolutely centralized command. You heard it from the Norwegian Air Chief yesterday. This is theatre level stuff. This is not penny packeting private air forces or whatever. Centralized command, theatre-wise, because nothing crunches time, speed, and distance like air and space power. Digitization. How many chiefs here genuinely think you're first followers? And how many of you in reality, like NATO, in too many areas are last followers? And I've put a small challenge out as I really run the clock into the red, which is, are we making digital decisions on operational need or an accreditation framework? What we also need to do, touched on yesterday, is increase our operating locations because that absolutely speaks to capacity and survivability. It's recasting the model against those 3 lines that I said, and very much looking in a multi-domain ops concept. And one of the things I probably should have made on IAMD, the second cultural reference, the Thunderbirds, back to mass in all of these things, and frankly all of our 5 priorities, and they apply to air and space, is Thunderbird 2. Thunderbird 2 was the one that came up on racks, and then you put the specific payload into the aircraft and off it went. I am at heart a truckie. So we need a Thunderbird 2 mindset here. We need to buy things that you can repurpose. And by the way, we need to do things where we are buying in the hundreds and thousands, because some of the bullets I've put up there allow you to do that. And my final thought, and why I put the unclassified bottom right picture up, that was, and it will be different now, the Ukrainian UAV Orbat. Those things I've mentioned at the top, if you really think your way through them, allow any Air Force with any budget to look fundamentally different from our perception of it and to deal with things in a fundamentally different way. Why did I ask you to think about 6th Gen? I wouldn't ask for a show of hands, but I bet most of you thought about a platform. What we should be thinking about is 6th generation air and space warfare and what that requires. And some of it is very cheap, and a lot of it ought to be very different. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Sorry.
Well, I don't have a hoodie and I don't have sneakers, but my rebellion up here is I'm not wearing a tie. Okay, I want to talk to you for a few minutes. I'm going to cut it short so we can get to the questions. So hopefully, and actually, if you can put the thing up there for the questions, I would like to make sure that we have a lot of time for questions. First of all, I am the last person on the last panel of the last day. So what more can I say that hasn't been said already? I'll come up with a few things. First of all, I can't believe that no one at any point in this conference pointed to the picture that has some kind of F-35 pilot on the left and some kind of android on the right. No one at all had made fun of that. Hopefully we'll talk about man and machine teaming in our discussion today, so I want to get to that. But I'm not going to do is, as a technology person from a technology company at a technology panel, you think I'm going to talk about technology. I'm here to tell you it's not going to solve your problem, okay? But what I will say is that is going to be part of every solution. That's very, very important that everyone in this room understands it. I think about the 3 T's. You have the technology, you have the tactics, and you have the training. You have to have all 3. For a modern Air Force, if you're only doing 2 of those 3, you are failing. You have to think about all 3 in concert, connected at all times. The other part of that, and this is the new level of thinking that we're getting to with that funny picture on the screen, is we think about hardware, we think about software, and now we're thinking about wetware. And so wetware is where the human comes into that, the human cognition. How does the human interact with this machine to do what we're trying to do? So previously we talked about hardware and software interactions, hardware and wetware interactions, and now the new generation we're thinking about software-wetware interactions. And so collectively we have to be thinking about all 3 as we move forward for building systems for defense. And I can't talk about, I have to talk about deterrence because it's on the panel. What more can I say about deterrence except that there were some really good pictures up here and some funny pictures of animals, and I will, from the cast. So one thing I will say is the squirrel on the left, he was not deterred because he actually did try and attack the pole. And so we do want to make sure he doesn't even try to attack. So he was deterred by that spring. And on the right, you have the cat. And the cat was not deterred from attacking because the water bottle kept attacking him back, right? So that was the counter-strike. And so what I'll say to that is that part of technology and deterrence is that you have to be able to have credibility and you have to show it in the manner that it's going to be used. So you can say those are animals, they don't understand what they're doing. The cat's probably smarter than the squirrel, but if that cat had seen that water bottle and see how much water it has, its magazine depth, it's seen its range and its power and its effectiveness or max effective range of the water, it would have a different calculus. It probably wouldn't have gotten that close, right? So the way that we can preemptively show these things and show that and build that deterrence by being prepared to deter an attack was what General Saltzman said yesterday. It was a great speech, by the way. So on that note, the other thing that when I stand here in front of all the air chiefs here, I think about deterrence, integrated deterrence, and as an American, I've got the funny U.S. accent standing up here. We think about it as through peace through strength, as kind of enduring, the politics aside, peace through strength. And one of the things that come to mind is what is the enduring strength from the United States? I'll tell you, it's not technology, it's not the nuclear weapons, it's not the $800 billion budget, it's you guys. And that's the 4th T. So we have technology, tactics, training, and teamwork. So we have to do everything as a team. And I'll end that with the last thing I want to say, which is in the past we talk about working together with integration. We want to work alongside our partners and allies. That's not good enough anymore. And that was alluded to a little bit yesterday. Integration, flying in the same airspace, being on the same radio, being in your altitude block, doesn't matter. That's not going to win the next war. In fact, that's probably going to lose the next war. Interoperability is the key word that everyone should be shooting for as a threshold objective, which is how do we actually work together collectively as a coalition, combine our resources to achieve a common objective. What we really want to get to, and software I think opens the door for this, is interchangeability. That is the next level of interoperability. I'll give you two hardware examples, just because software is a little abstract still. So in World War II, one of the big challenges that the Allied forces had was they had all these, they were building all these bombs, different types, different shapes, different sizes. But the problem was they couldn't put them on all the different aircraft because bombs were coming from different factories, airplanes were coming from different factories. And so after World War II, when NATO was established in 1949, one of the first things NATO did was establish a standard for interchangeability of weapons on aircraft. And so today, if you in this room have an Air Force that has an airplane that drops a bomb off of it, it either has a 14-inch lug spacing or a 30-inch lug spacing. And that dates all the way back to the lessons learned about interchangeability from World War II. More recently, and this will talk a little bit multi-domain, the F-35. Those that fly the F-35 in the room, you know it has a gun. Opinions aside of how effective the gun may or may not be with its ammo, but it uses a 25 millimeter Gatling gun. And that bullet, it's 25 millimeters by 137 millimeters. And the reason why it's 137 millimeters has nothing to do with making sure we designed the best bullet for the F-35. It had everything to do with making sure we had interoperability and interchangeability, multi-domain. And so that bullet that goes in the F-35 goes in the 25 millimeter defense weapons on Navy ships across the coalition. It's the same bullet that goes in the 25 millimeter guns on the Army's infantry fighting vehicles that many of your services use. And so I'll use that as your analogy for software. Human, machine, interface, teaming, interoperability, interchangeability. We talked about CCAs, and I'm really looking forward to your questions to talk more about software, autonomy, robotics, and unmanned systems. But I want to set all that out to frame this discussion, and I'm looking forward to your questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So without further ado, I'd like to put this question to you, Mike. We've spoken about the need to be collaborative in innovation. Is it time to stop building sovereign systems that are interoperable and to start consider collaborative development of common systems?
Yes. So from industry, none of the industries that we have in any of the nations, whether it be the UK, the US, everyone is always looking to partner, right? So there's partners and allies. We talk about the air services. There's partners and allies in industries, and that has to be trans-regional, international, and anyone that's in defense industry would tell you they're always looking for positioning and partnerships of how people can work together and create synergistic outcomes, not only from a business case, but from a capability base to solve people's problems, namely the people in the room. So absolutely. Is there a good conduit to do that? I'd say it's challenging. I think it's getting better. If you are, and it's a balance, right? Because every nation in this room, I think in the last 10 years, has realized that if we don't do things ourselves, that skill will atrophy in our industrial base, and we're not going to get it back. Reference F-35 and then 6th Gen. Like how many 5th Gen programs are there? There's the coalition of kind of one. I think everyone's realizing if we don't build an aircraft in the next 50 years, no one in our country will know how to build an aircraft. And so you get these incentivized FCAS, NGAD, GCAP, et cetera. So there has to be a way to do it. I have seen promises, but I don't see an actual framework of working together.
Okay, thank you, John.
So very quickly on that, the 5 priorities mentioned earlier, they actually rest in an integrated by design. The clue is in the title, campaign plan from AirCom, and it's mirrored in USAFE as well. If I took one strand, agile combat employment, because it was mentioned yesterday, we've just released internally our ops design, building on our ConOps for it, because agile combat employment in Sweden or Finland looks different than it does in Italy, France, Germany, or the UK. But there are some fundamental principles that apply. Part of that is ourselves getting back into the game of stuff like aircraft cross-servicing, which we were really good at, and then we kind of just let it go. And NATO is pretty good at standardization. It has the standardization agreements, the STANAGs that Mike was talking about. But if we're honest, some of those were kind of more honored in the breach over the last couple of decades because we didn't have to worry about it. That first long shadow, we now need to worry about it. And we're very much getting back into that place.
Okay, thank you. Angela, a question for you, and one which I think a lot of people have really been thinking about recently, is artificial general intelligence a juvenile science fiction delusion or serious risk and opportunity? And what do you judge to be the subjective probability of its arrival in under 5 years? what does it have to be before we plan for it?
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, it's a buzzword, and my guess is that unless it is very demonstrably with us in 5 to 7 years' time, for the rest of my life we will argue about whether or not we have it, in a way that's sort of quite boring, actually. And I think the interesting question is, I think the really interesting question is, how can we do our jobs better? Your incredibly important jobs, various other jobs that government does about making lives better for citizens. How can we do those jobs better using the AI that we've got today and with clear plans for how we're going to use the AI that we know is coming tomorrow? And actually we know what we have to do, because the thing we have to do is sort out the data we've already got. How do I know that? Well, because I've had working life in data analysis and modelling, and the rule of thumb always was it's 80% effort on sorting out the data, and then the algorithms are actually reasonably straightforward. And I don't think that's going to change. And the second way I know that is from the example here in the UK government. If you look at the bit of the UK government that is going absolutely great guns with the new kinds of generative AI, the stuff that's been in all the newspapers the last year, it's the Department for Work and Pensions. Why? Because they put a massive investment in sorting their data out. They figured out, actually, we're a data organisation. We have two things. We have a massive, great rule book about how we persuade people, help people get back into work, and what state aid is, what state help is available for certain individuals. We have that, and then we have a massive data about people. So they sorted their data out. So when generative AI came along about 2 years ago, they were able to start building really, really useful products. The first product they've built, this one's already rolled out. Do you know what it does? It reads letters that come from people, which of course will arrive in all kinds of formats, you know, typewritten, emailed, some of them even handwritten. They're always under immense pressure to get back to people. They've written a generative AI program that will read any of those letters and find the people that they must get to in the next 2 days, because something terrible is going to happen. They have other things they do, but I'm not entirely sure they're public. So, but there are some there are some things they do that are sort of rather akin to what I was talking about with the model and the experimentation going hand in hand. So things about service delivery for individuals, where what you do is you use a model to tell you, today, these are the 3 pieces of information you must solicit from this individual so that you can, A, help them figure out what they need to be doing to get back into work, and B, tell them what they might be entitled to. Back to the real question, am I going to take a punt on that? No, I'm not, because it's such a poorly defined term. It really is a poorly defined term. We did a lot of work on this a year ago, exactly this question, and we ended up thinking, in fact, the definition is so contested that the debate ends up not being terribly exciting. You end up with a long debate about, oh, well, is this AGI or not? And in fact, there are a whole load of super interesting questions. I've talked about opportunity. There are a matching set about safety that you can have without falling into, I think, the fallacy, and I am an academic, of only talking about definitions.
Okay, thank you. On that, staying with the AI point, though, we hear that AI is central to the future of air power to achieve effective deterrence. Why is the UK so slow to invest scaling AI as China and Russia are? Johnny, have you got a view on that?
Yeah, just before I do, could one of the wonderful air staff team make sure my wife can get in? Because I didn't go to the front door and say Lisa Stringer is pitching up. So if you could do that, that would be brilliant. Right, so AI. I would contest that premise, actually. The UK, depending which metric you take, is kind of in the top 3, top 5 on AI development. So in terms of the fundamentals, it's a pretty good backdrop. We were discussing, by the way, over breakfast this morning, even allowing for that statement, when one looks globally within all of the nations that are here, it's not a massive pool of talent that we're fishing in. That is an absolute truism, and we need to build that. And I speak as a father of a computer hardware and software engineering graduate. He chose the wrong path, but never mind. But the point being is, we do have the resource, and I think the bedrock, and Angela will know this far better than me, to draw on. what's holding us back? So 2 years ago, I spoke here and I said that on AI, we still, in the public discussion on it, feel about it rather than think about it. And I think it's beholden on all of us. The bit I didn't say, by the way, when I mentioned on the engagement, media, sophistication and debate, that doesn't happen unless we're in that debate. So we have to talk about it. By the way, autonomy in weapons goes back to the first infrared Sidewinder, or even probably earlier. So we've been here for decades. By the way, what happens with the 155 unguided shell when it leaves the barrel? So we're just not having a richness and a history in the discussion and the sense of what is essential here and what we therefore have to apply as air and space forces. Nations will have different perspectives on where the human needs to be in, on, whatever, on the loop. That's absolutely right, because societal and cultural things are a key part of this discussion. But I still look on 2 years from chatting here and go, I'm really not sure we've moved that discussion on in public. And it's beholden on us to do it. Because if we don't, we're going to end up facing adversaries who not only don't operate to the same moral compass we do, but they are absolutely progressing stuff here. To the questioner's point, we can't afford to be in that place.
Dame Angela, I just want to get your perspective on this. You talked about the crucial importance of data, which underpins everything. So in some respects, do you think maybe China and Russia are accelerating more quickly into scaling AI, but do they have the data, do you believe, the deep data wells, accurate data wells to underpin that?
I don't know about Russian data. I certainly know that in scientific circles, China is extremely fast and thoughtful about the data that it collects and the way it stores it so lots of people can use it. And I go one step lower even before the data, which is to be very, very clear, what is the question? And I think that is something that it just does require time to stop and think about. What is the problem you're trying to solve here? Because I think too often people in many walks of life, Mike, this is probably your lived experience. Well, I've been very interested to hear about your lived experience. They say, oh, I've got this kind of problem, but I'm sure AI will sort it. That won't do. You need to be more specific than that with actually what is the problem here. And if you can, and then what you need is really good, rich conversations with people who understand the creating of AI tools, who can understand your words. And I mean, you might forget, but military words, you have a very specialist language. I mean, I had actually forgotten sitting here today. I'm thinking, oh yeah, that's right. They talk in this really weird code. So you need relationships with people who can understand your language and turn that into a question that AI tools can address, and then talk to you about, well, what's the data you have, what's the data that you don't have, but you might have access to a proxy. I'm very, if I may, inclined to pass this over to Mike.
What questions should we be asking Mike?
Well, what do you want it to do? What are you trying to do with it? Like the data, and honestly, like some AI doesn't even need data. Like that's kind of the thing that no one really talks about. There are certain types of applications where you use AI as a tool to do something that you need the data. Two examples come to mind. One of them is computer vision. So if you want to do like scene recognition, that kind of thing, you're going to need to use a type of AI either called supervised learning or unsupervised learning, and there's a hybrid one where you get lots of data of this is what a water bottle looks like, here's the different angles, here's the different sizes, and it starts mapping out those attributes. You need the data for that. The other type is to create those inferences that Angela mentioned. Imagine if you had a large language model, which already exists, and then you took something like everything Putin ever said over the past 30 years. You could actually feed that into what's called a RAG on the side, and you could actually query the model as if it were Putin and create inferences of everything he's ever said. You'd need data for that, and you would absolutely want to have clean catalog data of what he's actually said, not just what people have said that he said. But for the, applications of autonomy, ATR, ATD, that kind of stuff, for your image recognition on sensors, you actually don't need a whole lot of data. We actually do synthetic data generation. We use reinforcement learning as one of the techniques. We actually create these training leagues of agents, and then we call it league play. They basically fight each other, and then we do it hundreds of thousands of times. to create these inferences and learning, but we create our own data to do that.
So there's a question here which is probably at the top. Looking back at 2022, then how could we have better used technology to deter the Russian invasion of Ukraine?
Ooh, great question. So 2 things on that. I would say that when the invasion started, and we actually didn't talk about this at all yesterday, which is surprising. I think you could characterize the invasion as a dislocation strategy. He wanted to seize the capital within 10 days. That failed. I think he pivoted to an annihilation campaign for about 72 hours, and then it devolved into an attrition campaign, right? So the real question is, how did we deter that dislocation campaign? Why did he think he could take the country over in 10 days? Which is a whole different discussion, and there are experts in this room way smarter on that to answer that than I am. But the other question is, and General Sultan and I were talking last night, is it an undeterrable event? So we just spent a generation in the Middle East fighting irrational people. Like, you cannot rationalize with them, and there's nothing you're going to do is going to stop like a 9/11, right? They're just going to find a different way. So I'm not saying that those two are the same, but I think there's some parallels to draw from that. I think to say that Putin invaded and that's a failure of deterrence, I think it's a mental shortcut that everyone in this room is too smart to fall for. I think it warrants a very, very difficult conversation.
So can technology help against irrational actors, Johnny?
Well, I mean, on a very simple level, yes. The point I'd make, if I can, Suzanne, just sort of bridging from that question. I was struck yesterday by General Saltzman's comment, which is absolutely on the money. Don't configure your forces to deter. Configure your forces to win, because that's how you deter. And as we roll into Fairford, ask ourselves, have we created a few airshow air forces? Something does 9G in front of the punters, something you can look at in the static park, but we haven't addressed all the other lines of development. And that almost comes back to the first pitch yesterday on where you put your money to ensure that your credibility and your capability and your ability to win is underwriting your deterrence. The second bit I'd reflect on yesterday, directly related to the question, it's a shame because Jim only had the few minutes he did. The graph on oil and gas revenues, anybody have a look at what happened between 2014 and 2015? It went up. So after the annexation of Crimea, we had an opportunity to demonstrate from the economic and political levers that we were serious about what was going on under Putin 2 or 3.0, and we gassed it. So therefore, having a deterrence discussion, could we have done this, that, or the other in 2022? I hate to say it, we'd set the conditions beforehand. And those conditions were set in places other than just Ukraine.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to open the floor now because I know we have a question over from the media team, the media representatives here. If you could bring down the microphone, thank you very much.
Hi, Mark Ronnie from Defense and Aerospace. Great discussion. And I would ask, I guess, this question of Air Marshal Stringer. You talked about the theory of victory, right? What does a cogent theory of victory look like at a time when we are, all of us, in financial binds? The U.S. Air Force is considering next generation air dominance, in part by trying to calculate, I think as General Alvin has talked, like what's the best investment of that money? Is this program the best way to move the needle? Justin Bronk yesterday talking about, okay, do we need to do global combat air program? Is that the best use of resources? What does that theory of victory need to look like to then guide your investment to build the forces that are those winning forces that go beyond an air show ramp, great air show ramp, even though that's lovely, and who doesn't like an air show?
In less than 12 words? Right.
You can take as many words as you want, sir.
So I set out a little bit of it, which is the credibility and capability in your forces. A number of folks in this audience will know what follows, which is the only thing more expensive than building a first-class air force is trying to build a second-class one. So you've got to invest in it. Back to credibility and capability. A strand from yesterday that I think we probably ought to pull out a bit more is there are a number of lines of effort here that need to be addressed concurrently. It's not a, do I buy this or do I buy that? Do I do R&D here or do I put the money into expenditure up front? The reality is you need to do all of those. And the bit which I was really pleased was discussed yesterday, but again, my word, we need to have a seminar on it, is risk in the air domain it's been a regressive discussion over the last 20 years. And we've got to understand and have that discussion better. So let me give you an example to kind of flesh out the theory of victory point. If I can buy an industrial printer that produces 15 Thunderbird 2s every hour, that I can now put different power plants, sensors, packages into, and then I put an air safety and airworthiness structure on it that applies to a multi-billion pound crewed aircraft. Is that right?
Well, hold that thought. And I know there's another question at the front. Robert Fox wanted to ask a question.
Sorry for Dame Angela, it's a bit of Groundhog Day. When I first met you, you talked about the quantum revolution, and which you've all been talking around. Could you give me a rain check where we are with quantum? And you feared from the first time we met, which was a future army demonstration on Salisbury Plain, you thought the Chinese, with quantum computing, were going to get way ahead of us quite significantly quickly. Now, I'm going to abuse the privilege of having the microphone. Can I do a pushback against the Air Marshal about media dialogue?
Only if it's good.
No, it's going to be bad news. Your brother's much... Oh, sorry. Your point about the media dialogue and the media discussion is absolutely found. I've been in this game now 57 years this September, and it's the changing context, and it's, you know, the society, but also the information environment in which we work. And I would like to say there are two heroes in this. My younger colleagues, and many of them are more than 2 decades younger than me, and they're represented here, are as good as any I have worked with in the DCA. They are good, and they are struggling with a much more complex media environment, editorial environment, proprietors, audience, TikTok, you name it, that I have. Also, the most eloquent spokespeople for what your endeavours are, and this is 50 years, are the service men and women I've worked alongside. They are the best to speak in your cause. And thank you for allowing me to say that.
No, Rob, can I?
Yes, yeah.
So first off, by the way, let's not get onto conscription. So first off, certainly not a pop at anybody in the media. And I'll tell you, I'll give you a personal example why. When I went out for a year as the Air Component Commander in the Middle East, late 16 to late 17, Mosul to Raqqa, we had done ourselves no favours with how we'd engage with people. I won't go into any more detail, but it wasn't as good as it should have been. And we can't critique people if we're not engaged in a discussion with them, for good or ill. And I wasn't allowed to have a Twitter account, but I was allowed to go and kill lots of people, which is a bit weird.
Well, I think certainly the Reserve Forces have helped with that. 7644 Squadron, I'll just give it a shout out. Media operations, we have certainly helped smooth the relations, I would say, over the past few years. But I do want to get back to this central point that Robert made. Can you tell us, Angela, where we are in terms of quantum right now, and how do you believe potential adversaries may be potentially ahead of the game?
No, I can't tell you that. What I can tell you is still no useful calculation from a quantum computer. So if I tell you, I mean, let's remember one thing today. When we talk about quantum technology, sometimes we're talking about quantum computing, and the answer is still quite a few quantum computers out there. I bought one, but still no useful calculation yet. Okay, you read fancy stuff about these great calculations they've done, but they weren't useful. And I'm not going to talk about what China's able to do. But quantum technology means many things much more beyond quantum computing. And there are all sorts of exciting, useful things. And I think particularly the dead reckoners. So, you know, the things you stick into a device, there's either going to be somewhere where it can't access PNT signals, or you're worried they might be jammed, and it can tell you where you are. And I mean, that's a real thing. So, I mean, we've all got used to quantum clocks, but the dead reckoners are here. So don't get confused that because the quantum computer still seems to be taking a very long time to arrive, that means all of quantum technology is slow. It's here, we will have it.
Mike, give me your take on quantum technology.
What she said. She's far more versed in that than I am.
Oh, can I have one more thing, actually? If you're interested in quantum technology, come to the Quantum Technology Showcase in London in the autumn. It's usually early November. It's like you go for the day, you come out and you think, oh my goodness, I've been in the future.
Fantastic. Great plug there. So Angela, as well, a question's come through. As the government's chief scientific advisor, what would you be advising the Prime Minister in terms of 3 priorities for defence and national security, and also in regards to what the MOD must do to embrace the present and future scientific and technological advancement?
Okay, so 3 defence things for the Prime Minister. Actually, no, I'm going to just start with defence. Defence, I'm really sorry, but could you please hire yourself a chief scientific advisor? That's really straightforward. You do not currently have one, and I think that's a bad place to be going into a strategic defence review, actually. I mean, your history is so rich in thoughtful, clever, useful science that gets pulled through into being in the hands of people who really have to use it, that it's really important that you don't lose that. 3 things for the Prime Minister. I would still say data, actually. I would still say data because the example you give, synthetic data is great if you know the rules. So if you know that's why synthetic data has been so fantastic for all the game playing. So basically, I mean, you might wonder, why did all those AI people build all those things to make games? And it's not just because they're it's not just because they're people who like playing games, although many of them are. It's because you know the rules. If you know the rules of the game, you can create data till you're blue in the face. And it will always be a correct representation of reality because reality is the game. The other time we can use synthetic data is when when it's not a game, but for some reason we know the rules very well, and Newtonian physics is the best example of that. So there are lots of places where synthetic data really is very, very useful, I agree. If we'd been a proper discussion, then I'm going to turn into one, I'd have said to Mike, so that means you think you know how your adversary is going to behave, is that right?
Ooh, that's a great question. Well, you try to replicate what the human would do, right? But you also, nominal, off-nominal, and then we have randomizations. And so, and I'll give you a great example. Our company, way back when, years ago, did a competition called Alpha Dogfight, and we won. And the reason we won, yes, our agent was flying against different companies and eventually against a human in the sim, and we took it and flew with DARPA, with the Secretary of the Air Force. But the point was, the way that our agent won is that it played by different rules. And the rules they're there for everyone to exploit, but they weren't exploited because of a culture. So the humans and the other agents were built to conform to these training rules that we do when we fly. Well, this is in the sim, and there's no rules, and so our agents were trained without those rules, and so they were extremely aggressive, and a human would never do that because it has, reckless abandonment is what I would call it. It's just going to go, it has one job, which is kill. Like, survive, don't care, I want to kill. And the way that the game was architected, it optimized for that. And as soon as you got the kill, the game would end. And so even if he was going to be 90 degrees straight down and get a kill, and he was going to die 5 seconds later, it didn't matter. And so because of the way the game was orchestrated, it was optimized for that. So there's kind of 2 points to that. One of them is the artificiality of where the game starts and stops, and the other one is the constraints of the rules of the game.
So okay, I think for this audience, it is important to know that the reason, you have these unbelievable flight simulators, just fantastic, fantastic things. That's because Newtonian physics is a fantastic thing. We have no equivalent of Newtonian physics for human behavior.
We've, in the US, I'll tell you that the US is spending a lot of money, roughly $1 billion a year of building out a physics-based synthetic environment to do air and space training and test validation right now, because it's very, very important for the reasons that you say. That we begin to use low fidelity sims, we're going to use the wrong lessons and then take that airborne, it'd be detrimental. So.
Thank you. I'm just going to give the last word to Johnny, because
Yeah.
we are going to have to wrap this up. There is so much more to say, I know, but Johnny, go ahead.
This is one of those hours where I really do feel like a humanities graduate. So,
Never mind.
I bear it heavily, and so I'll just offer one thought on that, but you could, hopefully it's a much broader one. Actually, you know what? You can work out how your opponent might operate and what they might do. And for this audience, it comes from the cockpit up to grand strategy in terms of understanding them. So leave you with a thought. It might have been in Stephen Bungey's book from a few years ago. The Luftwaffe knew which way most RAF pilots would brake in a dogfight. They'd brake left. If you think about it, anybody who's flown here, it's kind of easier to do that than it is to do that. So they lined up, the really sharp ones lined up their shot for which way the guys were going to brake. You can do that when you look at our adversaries and competitors at the grand strategic level, if you're curious enough, if you really mind the data, and if you put the time and the effort into it. My worry as air and space forces is we're very good at tactics and technology. We're very good at fighting the next 5 minutes every 5 minutes. Bit like Ferris Bueller, folks. You know, at times you need to stop and look around, because we need to be thinking about what our opponents, our adversaries, and our competitors are going to do, and we need to apply finite resources intelligently as we can to get ahead of them. And that requires thinking. It doesn't require expenditure.
Well, thank you very much. And it's a great thought to leave us with, really. Stop, think, and look around. And this is, of course, what this conference is all about. So thank you very much to the panel, to Mike, to Johnny, and to Angela. It's been absolutely fascinating. Thank you. Thank you. So yes, we are very close to the end of the day. I'm very sorry I couldn't get through all of those questions. There were a lot. Some of them veered off the kind of tech focus and deterrence a little bit, but there will be ample opportunity to discuss further with our great panel over lunch. But now, just to bring this conference to a conclusion, I'd like to welcome back the Chief of the Air Staff, Air Chief Marshal Sir Rich Knighton.
Joining me as well? Is he? Come on stage, Greg. I want everybody to see your shoes.
Find a pair of flip-flops.
So, ladies and gentlemen, it falls to me just to say a few thank yous, but I do just want to reflect for a moment on some of what we've just heard and Johnny's final statements about thinking. I don't think I've been to a conference in all of my time in the service, whatever colour of cloth that's run it, where we've gone from Newtonian physics, quantum technology, Thucydides, and then loads of internet pictures of squirrels, cats, and parrots. And really what I want to say is that actually the range and breadth, but also the depth of the conversation is the best that I have known in my time as chief, but certainly actually over many, many years. And that is because of the hard work that went into preparing for the conference. And so I want to say a particular thank you, Greg, to the Air and Space Power Association for putting on the conference today, for educating us, for organising us and pulling together what was a really genuinely brilliant and very slick process. I also, though, want to say thank you to one person in particular, which is Group Captain Paul Sanger-Davies. So Paul is our Director of Defence Studies. His last day in the job is tomorrow, and that's not because the conference didn't go well, just to be clear. This is his 4th conference. And so, Paul, I just want to say on behalf of everybody, you've absolutely nailed it. So thank you so much. There's a massive amount of work that goes on in the background to make this all come together. So from my air staff team, thank you for everything you've done. Greg, I've said thank you to the Air and Space Power Association for everything you've done. To those who've spoken and those who've answered questions, that really does add to the intellectual level of the debate. And what I've tried to do with the conference over the last couple of years is focus us on the reason why we exist, which is to be ready to fly and fight. But to expose ourselves to different ideas and try to evolve and develop that thinking in order to find a way to deal with some of the threats that we've talked about over the last couple of days. But my final thank you goes to all of you in the room for being part of this. To industry, for your sponsorship and your support and taking my challenge, well, so far, pretty well. I'm sure I'll get a chest poking at RIAT and Farnborough. But for being engaged and involved, for coming, giving up your time to be here, because as I said in my speech, it's what we say that matters, but also what we do and what we do together that matters more than anything else. So thank you all very much indeed for being part of the conference. I look forward to seeing many of you at the Roval International Air Tattoo, Fairford and Farnborough next week. But for now, thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Sir Rich. So I can give you all sorts of advice, as you well know, but when you've done 5 days at Farnborough, after 3 days at RIAT and 2 days here, and you've got sore feet, come and have a chat with me, all right? I know, because I've done that. I don't want to add too much to what Rich has just said, because he's, as ever, eloquently covered all the major points. But I fundamentally believe we're at an inflection point. Now, if you leave this room today and you don't think we're at an inflection point, either we failed or you didn't listen, because change is coming and we need to be ready and we need to think very carefully about how we get there. The Minister gave us plenty of clues here for the UK, but I think we've all got enough clues here that we can't just carry on business as usual. So that's the one takeaway. I'll echo exactly what Rich said in terms of the quality of the speakers. Thank you so much. Without you, the conference is nothing, but also from the audience for your engagement, both here and virtually, because obviously the richness of the conference is based on that. For those that I may have offended by some of my comments, some of it's deliberate, because I want to antagonize, I want to create some debate, but I think the more we challenge each other, the better we will be for it. I also want to make a special thanks for all our international visitors. You is what makes this conference so special, coming from so many parts of the world, adding your input, whether it's here on the stage or whether it's just by being here and giving us your alliance and your friendship. So thank you all for coming, and safe journey home when it comes. The IET have been with us now for quite a few years, and Martin and Cecile will be somewhere in the background and may be able to hear us on the speakers. But thank you to both of them and the entire team at the IET who have looked after us so brilliantly, so thank you to them. And Rich, thank you to you and the Royal Air Force. Paul, I echo, we've been working with you now for a few years. Thank you, wish you all the best. I know you're going to move on to even greater challenges, but good luck with those. And to John Shields, sat at the other end of the queue there, is the man taking over. So looking forward to working with you, John, and your entire team, who have been brilliant as ever. Outside, we've got another support team. We've had London UAS here and others, and other people in light blue uniform who've made this function and work, and have got plenty more work to do at the weekend, so thank you to them. The SLT, who've been ever present and a vital part of the engagement, but also to the RAF Police and the Met Police, who have been relatively quiet and kept us relatively quiet in here, thank goodness. They've been looking after our security, doing it brilliantly, as only the Brits will do, understated as ever. And finally, Sir Rich, to you. This is your conference. Without you and without your people, this would not happen, so thank you to you and your team. Finally, last but not least, to my Air and Space Power Association team, not many of them there, tucked in at the back. Carol, Debbie, Kate, Kerry, Catherine and Clive, and the girls behind the counter. Thank you to all of you. You've been absolutely instrumental in keeping this going. And that leaves me with one final farewell. Some of you will be going to RIAT and to Farnborough, as obviously is not unusual at the end of this. I wish you a safe journey, and I look forward to seeing you next year. There is a Defence Space Conference. We're holding it here in London with General Paul Tebman. There you go. I knew that was coming up. 24th and 25th September. So if you really want a little bit more depth space, or maybe some more Greek philosophy, just come along and join us. Safe journey. Thank you. And best wishes from us, and see you next year.
We ensure our partner air forces have the combat air capability they need.
Focusing on tomorrow isn't enough. That's why we innovate for what comes after next.
With us, the UK is equipped with sovereign combat air power wherever and whenever it needs it.
We don't stop at technologies. We're making a positive impact on our wider society, developing skills, strengthening supply chains, and striving for net zero.
We're building strategic relationships on a local, national, and global scale.
Our people are everything. We're creating a culture that values diversity and celebrates